His life began not with a celebration, but with a wail that seemed to echo the misfortune already gathering around him. From the very first breath, a shadow loomed over his existence, marking him as a child of tragedy. While his mother cradled him with a weary smile, finally welcoming her son Kushi into the world, the joy was instantly shattered. His father stood nearby, clutching a phone in disbelief as he learned his company had collapsed into bankruptcy at that very moment. This was merely the overture to a childhood defined by crushing poverty, where he sat alone, counting the meager yen spent on a single, insufficient meal. Yet, the lack of money was only the beginning of a much deeper, more persistent curse of bad luck. It followed him everywhere. A simple walk down the street resulted in being struck by a car. A trip to the store led to false accusations of theft, and even a quiet moment out was ruined by the clumsy spills of strangers. His daily existence was a gauntlet of accidents. Eventually, the relentless tide of ill fortune claimed him entirely, bringing his short, 18-year journey to a somber end behind the black ribbons of a funeral portrait. But death was not the final curtain, merely a transition to something far more dangerous. He suddenly found himself standing on a cold, white expanse, his bare feet tensing as the low, guttural growl of a predator vibrated through the air. The transition was jarring, leaving him vulnerable and confused in this strange new reality. Before him stood a massive, white-furred beast, its eyes locked onto him with murderous intent as he realized he was no longer in the world he knew. The creature loomed over him, a physical manifestation of the danger that now surrounded him. With a sudden, explosive movement, the creature lunged, its massive claws tearing through the air with a deafening roar. The speed of the attack was blinding, leaving no room for hesitation or escape. The sheer force of the beast's presence sent him reeling backward, his body struggling to find its footing against the overwhelming pressure of the attack. He was tossed aside like a leaf in a storm, completely outmatched by the predator's power. He barely had time to raise his arms in a desperate defense before the strike connected, the sharp sting of a wound blooming across his side as blood sprayed onto the white ground. Pain flared through his senses, a brutal welcome to this new existence. He clenches his fist, the phantom image of a powerful, muscular arm overlapping his own as he prepares to strike. With every ounce of strength, the blow is unleashed, a desperate gamble against the predator. The strike connects squarely with the beast's snout, though the impact feels insignificant against such a massive foe. He stares at the creature, his mind racing with the absurdity of the situation and the certainty that his lifelong misfortune will ensure he is devoured rather than victorious. Suddenly, a blinding flash erupts as the beast lunges, the world dissolving into a chaotic blur of light and violence. Moments later, the boy finds himself standing amidst towering white pillars, his mind still reeling from the memory of being consumed by the tiger. A sharp voice cuts through his confusion, demanding to know if he is even paying attention. The small, pointed-eared girl sighs, lamenting the lack of focus in today's youth, while he can only offer a dazed, half-hearted affirmation. She reclines further, her striped-sleeved arms crossed as she expresses her irritation at his apparent lack of concern for his current predicament. He observes her youthful appearance, questioning if she is merely a child, which only serves to agitate her further as she blames him for her inability to quit her smoking habit. Finally, she stands tall and declares her divine status, explaining that she is the one who will reincarnate his soul into a new world, having already bestowed upon him 3 random, unique abilities. She continues her assessment of the situation, noting that despite the grim circumstances, a certain reality remains unavoidable. She suddenly erupts in frustration, pointing a finger and declaring that all 3 of the randomly assigned skills are complete duds, a situation she finds utterly ridiculous. After her outburst, she pauses to ask for his name once more, only to dismissively remark that Mutakushina is a difficult name to keep in mind as he introduces himself. She leans over her interface, sweat beading on her brow as she confirms that no matter how one looks at it, his luck is truly abysmal, leaving him to wonder just how bad the situation is. He responds with a chilling, wide-eyed smirk that catches her off guard, his expression twisting into something unsettling as he acknowledges his misfortune. She recoils from the terrifying grin, questioning his sanity, while he calmly explains that since he is so unlucky, he might as well follow the old adage that fortune favors the smiling. Shaking off the unease, she refocuses the conversation, preparing to detail the 3 specific abilities he has been granted despite his poor luck. She holds up 3 fingers, explaining that skills are essentially magic that allows one to wield power beyond the ordinary, specifically identifying his as grit, agelessness, and super speedy regeneration. She begins with the first, a passive ability that allows his body to mend injuries almost instantaneously, demonstrated by the rapid closing of a deep wound on a warrior's arm. However, she warns him that this healing is not infinite. There is a hidden limit to how many times it can trigger, and once that threshold is crossed, death is final. She moves on to the second skill, agelessness, explaining with blunt simplicity that he will simply never grow old, and that is the extent of the power. He listens intently, processing the information and noting that, despite her earlier warnings about his bad luck, these abilities hardly seem like useless failures so far. The conversation shifts to the third skill, grit, indomitable spirit, illustrated by the image of a warrior who remains upright despite being riddled with blades and arrows, though she warns that the true issue lies here. To clarify the mechanics, she produces a handheld device, intending to use a game analogy that leaves him momentarily bewildered by the sudden shift in tone. She explains that every living being possesses a hidden health gauge, where injuries and sickness chip away at one's vitality until reaching the finality of zero, which results in death. Leaning closer with a sharp glint in her eyes, she reveals that the grit skill only triggers when a person is teetering on the very edge of oblivion, at the brink of death. It allows a person to survive the unsurvivable, clinging to life with the absolute minimum of strength remaining, much like a battered soul barely standing on a single point of health. He begins to think this sounds like a form of immortality, but she cuts through his optimism, stating coldly that he will never actually be able to use it. The bluntness of her statement leaves him stunned, watching as she casually continues her explanation while focused on her device. She finally delivers the crushing caveat. The skill has a strict activation condition, requiring the user to possess a heart that truly does not fear death. She continues her lecture, explaining that the instinct to survive is universal, making death the ultimate terror for any living creature. Kachina listens, the weight of her words sinking in as he considers the nature of fear. From her seat of power, she reminds him of her divine perspective, having witnessed countless souls pass through reincarnation from this very spot. Leaning in with a piercing gaze and a cigarette in hand, she declares with absolute certainty that a person who truly does not fear death simply does not exist. When he tries to bring up her previous praise for his skills, she quickly shuts him down, clarifying that her initial assessment was entirely wrong and that his situation is far from amazing. He stands there, speechless, as the harsh reality of his situation begins to dawn on him. Her final verdict is cold and final. With the skills he has and the inherent fear in his heart, survival in another world is an impossibility. The divine realm fades into darkness, leaving only a sliver of light as the transition to the unknown begins. Suddenly, he finds himself lying flat on his back in the middle of a lush, sunlit forest clearing, the transition to the new world complete. Pushing himself up, he stares blankly at the sky, her parting words echoing in his mind as he finally understands why his abilities were labeled as useless duds. He stands and takes in his surroundings, faced with a massive, overgrown structure that towers over the strange new wilderness. Kachina stands alone in the dense greenery, his mind racing as he tries to process his new reality. He wonders aloud if this truly is another world, the silence of the forest offering no immediate answers. Looking around at the towering trees and thick undergrowth, he realizes that despite the isolation, he might survive. He notes the abundance of edible-looking weeds, finding a small measure of comfort in the thought that he won't starve in this wilderness. As he explores, memories of his encounter with the deity resurface, reminding him that water should be nearby according to the divine instructions. This thought is quickly followed by a more painful recollection of his mother. Her face was etched with regret as she apologized for her helplessness during his birth. Finding a clear stream nearby, he leans down and splashes the cool water onto his face, trying to wash away the lingering traces of his past life and the weight of those memories. He forces his features into a wide, strained grin, his eyes wide with a desperate sort of resolve. He mutters to himself that he must keep smiling, firmly believing that allowing his despair to show would only invite further misfortune into his life. Continuing his trek through the woods, he spots a cluster of mushrooms and some sturdy-looking vines. He considers how these resources might be put to use, his survival instincts beginning to take over as he assesses the environment. He pauses to rest near the base of a large tree, crouching low to the ground. He reflects that perhaps being stranded in the wilderness is better than being in a crowded town, as the presence of other people has always made him feel deeply uneasy. A rare moment of peace settles over him, and he closes his eyes with a genuine smile. High above in the canopy, however, a massive, furred predator snaps a branch, its predatory gaze fixed on the unsuspecting youth below. Without warning, the beast lunges, its heavy fists smashing into the earth with bone-shattering force. The impact sends him tumbling backward, his peaceful reverie instantly shattered by the violent and sudden assault. He hits the ground hard, gasping for air as he looks up in absolute shock. The towering silhouette of the forest monster looms over him, its massive hand reaching out to claim its prey as he realizes the true danger of this new world. He stares down in a daze, his mind struggling to process the sight of his own severed limb. A ragged groan escapes his lips as the reality of the injury begins to set in. The shock quickly gives way to a primal, soul-shattering scream. He collapses to the forest floor, clutching the stump of his arm as waves of excruciating pain wash over him, his cries echoing through the trees. As he gasps for air, the massive beast looms over him, its predatory gaze fixed on its wounded prey. The creature's heavy footsteps thud against the earth, a rhythmic countdown to the end. Suddenly, a strange sensation replaces the agony. He watches in disbelief as muscle and bone begin to knit together with a sickening series of cracks, realizing that the supernatural regeneration he was granted is already at work, forcing his arm to regrow in seconds. Before he can even process the miracle, a massive, furred hand descends. He is pinned against the dirt, the monster's overwhelming strength making any attempt at escape feel utterly futile. The creature's grip tightens, its fist closing around his entire torso. He is hoisted into the air being squeezed from his lungs as he is held like a mere toy. He struggles against the crushing pressure, his legs dangling uselessly in the air. The monster's face is a mask of predatory hunger as it prepares to finish what it started. With a terrifying roar, the beast brings him toward its gaping maw. He stares directly into the rows of jagged fangs, the stench of the predator's breath filling his senses in his final moments of consciousness. A sickening crunch echoes through the clearing as the monster's jaws snap shut. The world dissolves into a blur of motion and violence as the predator begins its feast. From her distant vantage point, the deity watches the gruesome scene unfold on her screen with a cold, detached expression. She muses that he simply isn't built for this world, while his final, fading thought is a desperate question of whether this is truly the end of his journey. She watches as the boy is consumed, his final gasps for air cut short by the crushing jaws of the beast. Blood spatters as the monster begins its grim feast, seemingly ending his journey before it truly began. Observing the gruesome display through her shimmering interface, she sighs, concluding that the supposedly useless skill she bestowed was indeed a failure. The creature, satisfied, licks its chops while the boy's cries fade into a haunting silence. With a look of bored disappointment, she crushes her cigarette into a crowded ashtray, lamenting his inability to survive the trials or contribute to her grand designs. He simply wasn't the candidate she hoped for. Deep within the woods, the massive beast stands triumphant, having fully swallowed its prey. She reflects that even the most potent regeneration or immortality is worthless when one is trapped and dissolving within a predator's gut. Taking another drag, she dismisses the concept of an indomitable spirit as nothing more than a hollow sentiment, utterly useless in the face of such a brutal reality. To her, the boy's struggle is over. Suddenly, a faint, sharp glint of light pierces the darkness of the monster's interior, a spark of something impossible. This unexpected flicker catches her off guard, just as she was preparing to search for a new candidate for reincarnation. She pauses, her eyes widening in confusion as she realizes something is wrong. Without warning, a blood-slicked hand erupts from the monster's throat, clawing its way back into the world from the depths of the gullet. She stares in utter disbelief, her mouth agape as the impossible unfolds before her eyes. The candidate she had just written off is refusing to stay dead. The beast gags and convulses, its eyes bulging in terror as the arm reaches further out, defying death itself. She can only wonder what kind of madness is taking place as the boy literally crawls out of the jaws of defeat. He bursts forth as the massive beast collapses under the strain of his sudden resurgence. The creature hits the ground with a deafening thud, its life force extinguished by the very prey it tried to consume. Watching the events unfold from her celestial office, the deity freezes in disbelief. Her screens display the impossible. The boy she had written off as a failure is standing amidst the wreckage of his predator, very much alive. She leans in closer, her mind racing to find a logical explanation for this anomaly. She wonders if his regeneration skill somehow accelerated beyond its limits. But the sheer impossibility of the situation leaves her breathless as she realizes something else might be at play. Deep within the monster's remains, a hidden power had surged to life. The grit skill, a manifestation of an indomitable spirit, had forced his broken body to knit itself back together against all odds. As he gasps for air, his face drenched in sweat and grime, the deity remains baffled. She knows that such a high-level skill should be far beyond the reach of a common human. Yet there he is, defying the laws she thought she understood. Instead of relief, a raw, agonizing scream tears from his throat. He bellows at the sky, demanding to know why he was forced to survive such a horrific ordeal. This visceral reaction catches the deity completely off guard. She stares at the monitor, her usual composure replaced by a look of genuine bewilderment at his lack of gratitude for his own life. He collapses onto the grass, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of resentment. He reflects on the absurdity of his situation, reincarnated by a strange entity, gifted a useless skill, and then denied the release of death even in the jaws of a monster. Pushing himself up with trembling hands, he cries out again, his voice cracking with desperation. He had truly believed that this would be the end of his unwanted journey. He looks toward the heavens, pleading to know how much longer he must endure this forced existence. From her distant perch, the deity can only watch in silence, acknowledging that the situation has taken a turn she never anticipated, finding the boy's despair deeply unsettling. He had achieved the impossible, wielding a skill that should have been beyond reach to claw his way back from the brink of death. Yet, as he stood over the fallen beast, the cruel irony of his situation was undeniable. The miracle of resurrection had been granted to the one soul who craved nothing but the finality of the grave. Collapsing to his knees before the massive carcass, he remained silent, his spirit crushed by the weight of his own survival. From the shadows, the deity watched him with a mixture of bewilderment and growing unease, her brow damp with sweat as she struggled to comprehend the nature of a man who viewed a second chance at life as a curse. His eyes were vacant, his mouth hanging open in a silent, hollow cry as the name of the skill that saved him echoed like a mockery in his mind. This indomitable spirit had not been a gift of strength, but a chain binding him to a life he no longer wished to lead. Perched atop the remains of his predator amidst the indifferent silence of the forest, he looked out at the world with a profound sense of exhaustion. He couldn't help but wonder why fate continued to deny him peace, forcing him to endure when all he wanted was to let go. He hunched over, his breath hitching as he questioned how much longer he could endure this miserable existence. Standing atop the massive, lifeless carcass of the beast that should have claimed his life, he cried out in anguish, wondering why he was the one who had to survive. As his fingers dug into the dirt, a notification flickered into existence, announcing the activation of a skill called Indomitable Spirit, an event witnessed with shock by a mysterious horned observer from afar who noted that this ability was previously thought to be useless. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He had truly returned from the brink of death, a fact that only seemed to fuel his internal torment as he screamed at the impossibility of it all. He clutched his head in his hands, weeping at the cruelty of a miracle bestowed upon someone who had no desire to continue living, feeling the weight of a life he never asked to keep. Watching the display with a mix of pity and intrigue, the horned girl remarked on the twisted nature of his fate, contemplating the irony of the indomitable spirit awakening in such a broken soul. He screamed at the heavens, demanding to know why he was always dealt the worst hand in life, while she watched his outburst with wide-eyed surprise from her monitoring station. A dark chuckle escaped her lips as she realized the irony, mocking the idea of calling such a cursed existence a miracle when it felt more like a cruel joke. Exhausted and broken, he slumped forward, unaware that she was now intensely curious about the man who possessed such a relentless spirit despite his despair. Determined to uncover the truth, she began rummaging through a stack of documents on her desk until she finally found the record detailing his tragic past. She stares at the data, her eyes wide with disbelief as the grim reality of the boy's past unfolds before her. The records show a broken figure lying motionless on the asphalt, a stark testament to a life defined by suffering. This tragedy began on a cold stretch of road, where the young boy lay crumpled and bleeding after a horrific accident. Emergency responders swarmed the area, their frantic movements a blur against the harsh pavement as they struggled to stabilize his broken body. As they worked, the air was thick with the boy's muffled cries of agony, a relentless chorus of pain that seemed to echo through the gathered crowd. One medic urgently checked for a pulse, noting with grim concern that the child was rapidly losing his grip on consciousness. Nearby, his parents stood paralyzed by the spectacle, their faces twisted in a mix of horror and accusation. While his mother wailed in despair, the boy's world narrowed down to the searing, white-hot sensation of his injuries, a torment that threatened to consume him entirely. Eventually, the chaos of the street gave way to the sterile, quiet isolation of a room at General Hospital. There, the boy sat upright in his bed, a small, fragile figure dwarfed by the clinical surroundings and the weight of his own survival. He was soon interrupted by a nurse who stepped into the room, her voice soft as she inquired if the medication had provided any relief from his suffering. He could only look away, his voice a mere whisper as he admitted that the pain remained as sharp as ever. She offered a sympathetic but firm look, explaining that medical regulations for minors prevented them from administering any stronger doses. With a heavy heart, he realized he would simply have to endure the lingering ache, nodding silently in resignation. After advising him to remain still and rest, the woman began to depart, but the quiet was suddenly shattered by a piercing cry from the hallway. A voice called out his name with an intensity that made the air in the room feel suddenly thin. The sudden intrusion caused him to flinch, his heart racing as the nurse peered toward the door, wondering aloud if the newcomers were his mother and father. He stared back at her, his expression a mask of growing apprehension. They stepped into the room then, their faces stretched into wide, performative smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. His father's voice boomed with a chilling familiarity as he addressed his son by that heavy, unwanted title. "Hey, Indomitable." He leans in with a wide, unsettling grin, his glasses reflecting the sterile hospital light as he asks how the boy has been. Yudo can only offer a hesitant, mumbled response, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden intrusion of his parents. While she pulls back the curtains to let in the harsh daylight, the man continues his interrogation, using that strange title again to ask how the experience was for Indomitable. He doesn't wait for an answer, instead reaching out to roughly pull at the collar of the boy's hospital gown. Yudo flinches, confused by the sudden physical contact and the cryptic nature of his father's questions about his condition. With a sharp tug, he exposes the jagged, horrific scar across the boy's back, demanding to know if the medical staff attributed the old wound to the recent accident. The boy remains frozen, unable to look his father in the eye. She clasps her hands together in a performance of relief, thanking goodness for the outcome while the boy remains silent. The close-up of his scarred flesh serves as a grim reminder of a past they seem eager to exploit. They begin to discuss their finances with a cold pragmatism, noting that the compensation from the driver should be substantial since a child was involved. They celebrate the fact that they won't have to worry about money for a while, treating the boy's trauma as nothing more than a financial windfall. He listens in silence, his mind drifting back to the pranks they forced him to perform, faking falls in restaurants for settlements or shoplifting by hiding items in his own bag. To them, these were minor efforts that now seem ridiculous compared to the payout from this accident. Ignoring the boy's silence, the man stands over the bed and instructs him to aim for an even more expensive vehicle next time. He reinforces the twisted belief that Yudo's recovery is merely a prelude to the next stage disaster, viewing his son's life as a tool for profit. While he continues his lecture, memories of the boy's childhood flash by, a blur of being slapped and called worthless until the violence became a routine part of his daily life. What began as stress from poverty evolved into a systematic cycle of abuse where he was always the target. Now, lying alone in the dark after they leave, he is consumed by a crushing sense of guilt. He has been conditioned to believe that he deserves the pain and the anger of his parents because of the misfortune he supposedly brings into their lives. He often wonders if a luckier version of himself would have known the warmth of a parent's praise instead of the constant, venomous accusation that his very existence had ruined their lives. In his mind, he can almost see a world where they smile and hold him, but that vision is shattered by the reality of his father's screaming face. Although the realization eventually dawned on him that his parents were the ones in the wrong, the boy found himself devoid of the strength required to resist their cruelty. He could only lie on the floor, a small, broken figure, while his father loomed over him in a blind, towering rage. After the outburst, the man would storm out, leaving behind a cold command to have the wreckage of the room cleared away before his return. Left alone in the silence, the child would slowly begin to pick up the pieces of his shattered environment, his spirit as fractured as the objects around him. Years later, he sits in a dim room, watching a broadcast where strangers are asked to name their most precious treasures. It is a concept that feels entirely alien to him. For as long as he can remember, his only goal was to obey and remain obedient, hoping against hope that compliance would spare him from the next beating. He watches as the person on the screen claims their child is their greatest treasure, and he grips his glass with a trembling hand. The sheer hypocrisy of the sentiment causes a physical ache in his chest, a pain far deeper than any surface wound, as he reflects on the treasure he was to his own family. His memories of specific nights resurface with agonizing clarity, such as the time his mother returned exhausted from work and lashed out because he hadn't thought to prepare dinner. That night, she fashioned a weapon out of a wire hanger, straightening the metal to strike him across the back repeatedly. He even practiced the art of the fake smile to survive his father's volatile moods, forcing himself to laugh at hollow jokes. He knew that failing to show the expected appreciation would result in a swift punch to the face, so he learned to mask his terror with a hollow, practiced grin. The violence he endured was as varied as it was relentless, ranging from a beer bottle shattered against his frame to the searing blow of a hot frying pan. In their drunken or frustrated states, his parents treated him as little more than a target for whatever objects they happened to have at hand. He faced moments of true terror, like having his head forced under a running tap until he gasped for air, or being kicked for failing to perform chores while bedridden with a fever. Most chilling of all was the cold glint of a knife held by his mother, a silent threat that left him paralyzed with fear. Ultimately, the details of the individual strikes, the slams against the wall, the kicks, the heavy-handed blows, all blurred into a singular, inescapable reality. He was a child who was simply, and repeatedly, hit, until the pain became the only thing he truly knew. He recalls the relentless cycle of violence that defined his childhood, a blur of being choked, struck, and kicked until the pain became his only constant companion. Because of this history, even the most horrific accidents, like being struck by a car, were just another entry in a long list of physical traumas he had already endured. The boy's heavy-lidded eyes reflect a profound exhaustion, staring blankly as he processes the reality of his current state. In his hospital bed, he concludes that pain is simply unavoidable, while his father stands nearby, callously remarking that next time he should aim for an even more expensive car to hit him. As his chest throbs with a dull, rhythmic ache, he clutches his bandaged torso, trying to steady his breathing against the physical reminders of the impact. Despite the visible injuries, he resolves that he won't have to feel a thing, a psychological shield forged from years of necessity. He lets out a ragged breath, the effort of maintaining his composure evident in the way he hunches over his own broken body. A faint, chilling smile touches his lips as he realizes that if he can truly feel nothing, then he can no longer be made to suffer, no matter what happens to him. Having mastered the dark art of completely blocking out his own agony, he settles back into the hospital bed, finally finding a twisted sense of peace that will allow him to sleep. Moments later, his mother's voice cuts through the silence, devoid of any warmth as she demands he hurry up and get discharged so he can return to his chores, while he silently acknowledges that his years of practice are the only reason he survived the crash. He reflects on his current reality while looking out at the mundane cityscape. He admits to himself that he exaggerated the severity of his injuries just to escape the relentless labor his parents demand, feeling a sense of guilt for the trouble he believes he's caused them. Yet, a darker realization takes hold. He is trapped in a cycle of servitude and abuse that he believes will only end with his death. The horned observer sits at her desk, meticulously reviewing the records of a young boy's life. As she flips through the pages, she pauses on a photograph, her expression shifting to one of somber realization as she contemplates the weight of the history laid out before her. She suddenly freezes, a startling thought crossing her mind as she leans back in her chair. The documents reveal a life of unimaginable hardship, leading her to understand the sheer brutality of the path he has walked until now. This history explains the emergence of a specific ability, the skill known as grit, or indomitable spirit. It is a power that defies the natural order, pulling a soul back from the very edge of oblivion and leaving them clinging to life by the narrowest of margins. While the power is immense, she notes that the requirement for its activation is nearly impossible to meet. It demands a state of being defined as having absolutely no fear of death, a concept illustrated by the cold, hollow gaze of a bleached skull. She continues her analysis, realizing that this condition is far more complex than a simple lack of cowardice. It is not merely about being unafraid to die. It represents a fundamental shift in the human psyche that is difficult to even comprehend. To understand this, one must consider the nature of pain itself, which serves as a vital mechanism for survival. When a blade slices into flesh, the resulting sting is the body's way of signaling that something is wrong. The moment a living being feels that sharp sensation, the brain immediately registers the injury. It is a biological alarm system, alerting the individual that their physical form has been compromised. This physical response is inextricably linked to a cascade of negative emotions, such as anger, sadness, or despair, These feelings instinctively surface, reinforcing the fear of pain and driving the individual to avoid further harm. Ultimately, this fear of pain is a core survival instinct, a protective barrier that keeps a person alert and focused on staying alive. Even the smallest flicker of fear serves a purpose in the grand design of self-preservation. Without that fear, a person becomes blind to the dangers surrounding them, much like a bird unaware of the hunter's aim. They would fail to notice the slow creep of illness or the immediate threat of injury, inevitably leading to their own destruction. She continues her analysis, concluding that the fear of pain is fundamentally identical to the fear of death itself. To truly lack the fear of death, one must achieve a total, absolute mastery over physical agony, transcending the limits of human endurance. She realizes, however, that such a state isn't reached simply by enduring hardship. It requires something far more profound than mere tolerance. Even those driven to the brink of ending their own lives cannot escape the primal terror and the searing reality of pain in their final moments. This is the core of the self-preservation instinct, a biological anchor that binds all living things to their survival, regardless of their will. Looking down at the boy's file, she wonders if his brutal upbringing was a crucible that allowed him to transcend these instincts and forge his indomitable spirit. Reacting to a sudden, heavy impact that echoes through the woods, she is left to wonder if he truly feels no fear of death. In the clearing, the massive creature collapses with a blade buried deep in its flank, while the boy stands nearby, breathless. He stares at the fallen predator, the realization dawning on him that the threat has finally been extinguished. Standing over the silent beast, he lets out a hollow laugh, savoring the grim certainty that his tormentor can no longer take his life. He stands over the fallen beast, a chilling laugh escaping his lips as he reflects on how his luck has finally run dry. This grim reality reminds him of his past, a life that felt like an endless trek through a barren desert where every day was a desperate struggle just to survive, leaving him with no energy for anything else. Back then, he was so consumed by the immediate need to endure that the very idea of escaping his circumstances never even crossed his mind, as he was too caught up in the simple act of existing. But in the midst of that hopelessness, a sudden, blinding realization finally took hold. He understood then that the only true exit from his suffering was the finality of death itself. Returning to the present, the young man stands small against the massive, lifeless form of the predator he just slew in the heart of the woods. As he rests his foot upon the creature's hide, he contemplates the cruel irony of his new existence. Despite his previous desire for an end, he realizes that his newly acquired traits, super speedy regeneration, agelessness, and his indomitable spirit, have made him something that cannot simply perish, leaving him to wonder if his chance for the escape of death has truly vanished. His grim reflection is shattered when a sudden whistle cuts through the air, followed by a violent explosion that erupts right where he stands. The force of the blast tears through the clearing, sending debris flying as he is caught in the wake of the unexpected assault. From the shadows of the surrounding trees, a young woman watches the chaos unfold, her eyes fixed on him as she acknowledges his presence with a low, intrigued murmur. She perches high within the foliage, her grip firm on the massive bough as she watches the aftermath of the explosion. Her expression is one of grim realization, acknowledging that the target she just engaged is far more formidable than he appears. A car speeds past, tires humming against the asphalt as it disappears into the distance. He stands among the parked vehicles, chest heaving as he struggles to catch his breath, sweat beading on his forehead from the exertion. His feet skid to a halt on the pavement, the sound of his ragged, heavy breathing echoing in the quiet space. Suddenly, a violent explosion rips through the nearby forest, sending a massive plume of smoke and debris into the air, signaling a clash of immense power. Amidst the settling dust of the woods, the young archer stands ready, her bow gripped tightly as she surveys the aftermath of the blast. She stares intensely at the source of the destruction, her mind racing with the realization that the man she faces might not even be human. His sheer power marks him as a grave threat. Far from the chaos, the observer slumps at her desk, overwhelmed by the unexpected turn of events and the scale of the unfolding disaster. Nearby, the researcher examines the files of the two reincarnated individuals, his voice low and frustrated as he laments how his choices have led to such a mess. The archer's focus is suddenly broken when a voice calls out her full name, Runa Kakyoin, causing her to snap her head around in surprise. She turns, her eyes wide with shock as she comes face to face with the source of the interruption, her guard momentarily lowered. She stands frozen, watching as the boy she believed to be dead clutches his head in agony. He groans, the sensation of life returning to his body bringing a familiar, searing pain that he grimly compares to the moment a car ended his previous existence. Seeing him move, the archer snaps back into a combat stance, her bow drawn and aimed directly at his heart. She demands to know how he could possibly be standing, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion as he looks back at her with hollow eyes. In response to the perceived threat, a shimmering light begins to coalesce between her fingers, manifesting into a lethal projectile. She pulls the string taut, the magical energy crackling as the arrow fully forms, ready to be unleashed upon the boy who refuses to stay down. He stares in wide-eyed wonder as the weapon appears out of thin air, the impossibility of the sight momentarily distracting him from the danger he faces. Ignoring his confusion, she screams at him, branding him a monster and demanding that he shed his human facade to reveal the beast she is certain lurks within. Instead of a monstrous transformation, a chilling, wide-eyed grin spreads across his face, a sight that unnerves her more than any physical threat could. He insists on his humanity, claiming his smile is proof enough, even as the expression remains devoid of any genuine warmth. Her mind flashes back to the brutal image of a beast's jaws crushing a human form, a memory that reinforces her conviction that no ordinary person could have survived such an onslaught. He, however, is lost in thought, reflecting on the mention of another world and the strange, divine entity that had crossed his path earlier. As he describes this supposed deity as nothing more than a foul-mouthed, smoking brat with a permanent scowl, she can only stare, her bow still raised but her resolve wavering in the face of his bizarre ramblings. He had just finished his bizarre explanation, leaving Runa Kakyo fuming with indignation. She shouted in exasperation, her anger directed at the woman who had apparently put her in this ridiculous situation. Far from the forest, the horned observer who had been watching the events unfold was equally enraged. She crushed a small object in her hand, cursing the turn of events with a venomous intensity. Still grumbling to herself, the divine entity stalked away from her monitors. The stress of the situation was becoming unbearable, and she decided she desperately needed to find a convenience store to replenish her supply of cigarettes, fearing the alternative would be her own undoing. Back in the woods, the young hunter remained focused, though her mind was clouded with doubt. As she prepared another shot, she couldn't help but wonder why she was always the one burdened with such troublesome reincarnated souls. She then attempted a daring maneuver, swinging through the trees on a thick vine to gain a better vantage point. Below her, the boy watched in silent bewilderment, unsure of what she was trying to achieve. However, her grace was short-lived as her foot caught on a protruding branch. With a sharp cry of surprise, she lost her grip and tumbled toward the forest floor, much to the boy's alarm. She landed hard, the breath knocked out of her as she stared up at the canopy in a daze. The world seemed to spin for a moment as she tried to process her sudden loss of dignity. Seeing her struggle, the boy cautiously approached and asked if she was all right. He offered a bit of practical advice, noting that the forest floor was treacherous and one had to be mindful of the tangled roots. Before she could even respond to his concern, a massive shadow loomed over her. A giant serpent, its scales shimmering in the dim light, suddenly lunged from the undergrowth and coiled its powerful body around her, pinning her arms to her sides. The beast tightened its grip, its cold eyes fixed on its prey as she gasped in shock. The boy could only watch, frozen, as the situation turned from a clumsy accident into a life-threatening encounter. She is hopelessly trapped, the massive coils of the serpent tightening around her small frame as the boy watches, paralyzed by the sudden violence. Struggling against the crushing weight, she screams for release, her voice strained as the predator's scales grind against her. Nearby, he can only stare, his mind racing but his body refusing to move. Her desperation turns to anger as she demands he stop standing there and help her, but he can only offer a frantic, uncertain cry for her to wait. The serpent ignores her pleas, its massive body shifting with a sickening sound as it prepares to finish its meal, leaving her bow discarded on the forest floor. Seeing her tears and hearing her repeated, broken pleas for salvation, he feels the weight of the situation pressing down on him, yet he remains torn by indecision. He stares at the beast's cold, unblinking eye, his thoughts becoming a hazy blur of terror as he realizes his own powerlessness against such a monstrous foe. A dark thought crosses his mind, reminding him that this girl had been hunting him only moments ago. He even considers that death might have been a mercy if she had succeeded. This moment of crisis triggers a buried memory of his mother standing over him in their kitchen, a heavy pan in her hand as she loomed like a shadow. In the memory, she berates him for his perceived failures, her face twisted in a mask of righteous fury as she prepares to strike, claiming her violence is the only way to make him understand. The girl's piercing scream for help shatters the flashback, the raw desperation in her voice demanding a choice he isn't ready to make. She screams desperately for salvation as the massive coils tighten around her. Yudo watches, the weight of his past still anchoring him to the spot. He finally breaks the spell of his own fear, cursing his hesitation as he lunges toward the beast. His bare foot strikes the ground with newfound purpose, driven by a singular, desperate thought. He must act. Her piercing cry echoes through the air, a sound so raw it cuts through his remaining doubts. His eyes widen as he realizes his limbs are acting before his mind can even process the danger. He grips a heavy frying pan, his face slick with sweat, but his resolve hardening into a singular mission to save her. The young man charges forward, knowing that failure would lead to an unthinkable tragedy. He throws a desperate punch against the impenetrable scales, refusing to let the impossibility of the task stop him. The impact is explosive, a surge of unexpected power rippling through the serpent's thick hide. The boy stands back, stunned by the radiant energy now pulsing around him as the monster reels from the blow. He delivers a devastating blow, the force of it shattering the massive serpent's body into pieces. The impact sends a shockwave through the clearing, leaving the girl on the ground in a daze as the beast is obliterated. As the dust begins to settle, the severed head of the beast lies motionless on the forest floor. Nearby, the two girls struggle to catch their breath, coughing violently from the debris kicked up by the sudden explosion of power. Recovering from the initial shock, the twin-tailed hunter stares at him with wide, disbelieving eyes, demanding to know what he just did. He stands there, his fist still clenched, looking down at his own hand as if it belongs to a stranger, unable to process the event himself. She remains frozen in terror, her face pale as she realizes the sheer impossibility of what she witnessed. In contrast, he begins to spiral into a panic, his own voice rising in a frantic, wordless scream as the reality of the situation crashes down on him. Staring at the lifeless remains of the monster, he can hardly believe it is truly dead. The girl points out the most unsettling detail. The creature perished without him even making physical contact, a fact that only deepens his confusion and fear as he looks at his trembling hands. He brings his hand closer to his face, trembling as he contemplates the nature of his supposedly useless ability. A chilling question haunts his mind. What exactly did his power just do to cause such total destruction without a single touch? The massive serpent lies dead, its head severed cleanly from its body in the middle of the forest clearing. He stares at his clenched fist in disbelief, unable to comprehend how a single punch could have caused such devastating damage to the beast. He is visibly shaken, sweat beading on his forehead as he tries to process the impossible strength he just displayed and wonders what exactly just happened. In the quiet aftermath of the struggle, the young boy and the girl in the sailor uniform stand amidst the carnage of the forest clearing, the threat finally neutralized. She drops to her knees, bowing her head in a gesture of profound gratitude for the life he just saved, her voice trembling as she thanks him. Looking up with a blush of embarrassment, she offers a sincere apology for her earlier unprovoked attack, explaining she had mistaken him for one of the forest's monsters. Her curiosity piqued, she leans in and asks if he is one of the reincarnated, a term that seems to carry significant weight in this world. She continues, marveling at the divine skills he must possess to have returned from the dead after being devoured by a giant ape and then slaying a massive serpent with a single blow, assuming these are gifts from a goddess. He quickly dismisses her awe, claiming he doesn't understand how he killed the snake, and insisting his only skill is a simple, repetitive healing ability that keeps him alive. He stands before the fallen beast as the girl lists the extraordinary abilities he possesses: rapid regeneration, eternal youth, and an unyielding spirit. She continues, observing that such gifts would make him nearly impossible to harm, a thought that leaves him visibly stunned. Curious about her own capabilities, he questions the origin of the arrow she had manifested from nothingness. The memory of her summoning that weapon flashes through his mind, a display of power that defied logic. She confirms his suspicion, admitting that the feat was indeed her unique skill. Explaining the nature of her power, creation, she reveals she can manifest anything so long as she understands its composition, and she offers him a new garment to replace his tattered rags. He accepts the gift with a stuttered thanks, then asks if the explosive projectile she fired at him earlier was also a product of this skill, prompting a sheepish apology from her. She clarifies that while she can create such things, they are often ineffective against true monsters, likening the process to crafting a simple arrow with black powder. Having shared the secrets of her power, she finally offers her name, Runa. In return, he identifies himself as Kushina, leading her to inquire about the characters used to write his name and confirming his Japanese heritage. He stands in the quiet of the forest as the girl suggests a truce, noting that they are no longer enemies and should move on from this dangerous, monster-infested area. When she proposes they find a town or a safe haven together, he flatly refuses, stating his intention to stay behind, much to her bewilderment. The reason for his refusal becomes chillingly clear as he reveals a makeshift noose, calmly explaining that he intends to end his life right there. As he attempts to follow through, she lunges at him with a desperate cry, physically intervening to prevent the act and scolding him for such a reckless decision, refusing to let him say a final goodbye. He sits on the ground, grumbling about how he dislikes being around others because they always interfere, while she firmly declares that she won't stand by and watch him die. She softens her tone, pointing out that both of them had their lives cut short once before, and asks why he is so eager to throw away this second chance, though he remains stubborn, claiming his life is his own to dispose of. She counters his nihilism by arguing that despite the madness of this world, they have been given a rare opportunity to truly live. A sharp, painful memory of her own violent end flashes through her mind, the phantom sensation of a blade strike causing her to wince. Regaining her composure, she challenges him, suggesting that if he is so determined to die, he should at least do so fighting the monsters rather than by his own hand. Finally, she poses a logical question that stops him cold. Given his extraordinary regenerative abilities and indomitable spirit, does he honestly believe a simple rope would even be capable of killing him? He listens as she pours her heart out, her voice trembling with a desperate plea. She acknowledges his strength, the power that allowed him to fell the beasts of this world, and admits her own selfishness. She simply wants to live, to avoid the cold embrace of death once more, even if it means relying on him. Her composure breaks completely as she bows her head, tears streaming down her face. With a raw, guttural cry, she begs him to be her shield, to protect her from the horrors that lurk in the shadows. Staring at her, he is struck by the sheer intensity of her will to survive. He wonders how anyone could cling to life so fiercely in a world where nothing is certain and every moment is a struggle for sanity. He turns his gaze to his own hands, the realization finally sinking in. As long as these unnatural skills course through his veins, even the release of a noose is denied to him. His body simply wouldn't allow it. Looking back at the remains of the massive serpent, he admits his own uncertainty. He doesn't understand the source of his power or how he managed to survive that encounter, let alone if he has the strength to keep someone else safe. Despite his doubts, he clenches his fist, a spark of resolve flickering in his eyes. He gives her his word, promising that he will at least try to be the protector she needs. The heavy atmosphere evaporates instantly as she beams at him, her gratitude overflowing. Panicked by the sudden weight of her expectations, he tries to backtrack, stammering that he might not actually want such a heavy responsibility, leaving her gaping in surprise. Before he can retreat further, she reaches out, her fingers brushing against his as she moves to close the distance between them. He watches her hand, unsure of her next move. She seizes his hand in a firm, decisive grip, sealing their unspoken pact. With a newfound energy, she declares that the matter is settled and that they must move on to their next objective. Her next command is for them to prepare a campsite, a suggestion that leaves him reeling. The idea of sleeping out in the open within such a treacherous, monster-infested forest seems like madness to him. She leads the way as he reminisces about his lonely past, recalling nights spent on park benches after being locked out of his home. He realizes that while he is no stranger to the outdoors, this forest, teeming with wild beasts, is a far more lethal prospect than a city park. She confidently outlines their survival plan, prioritizing water, food, a secure campsite, and a fire. With a boastful grin, she assures him of her competence, citing her supposed past as a Girl Scout to justify her leadership. As they trek deeper into the foliage, she keeps a sharp eye on him, warning him away from a large, spotted mushroom. She cautions that there is no telling which plants are poisonous in this unfamiliar environment, urging him to be careful. He considers the arduous task of starting a fire by rubbing sticks together, but she quickly shuts down the idea. Spotting a small rocky opening, she suggests they use the cave for shelter from the rain, mocking his primitive survival ideas in favor of her specialized skills. She triumphantly produces a modern lighter, presenting it as the ultimate solution to their fire problem. She even muses about using her specialized powders or explosive arrows if a simpler method were not available, clearly proud of her inventory. However, her confidence wavers as she repeatedly flicks the ignition. The rhythmic clicking produces nothing but a faint metallic sound, with no flame appearing to light the dark cave entrance. She lets out a despairing cry as the device fails completely. He dryly points out the obvious problem. The lighter is simply out of fuel, rendering her modern convenience useless. She grumbles in frustration, lamenting the limitations of her creation skill. It seems she can only manifest items she understands, and since the chemical composition of lighter gas remains a mystery to her, she cannot replenish it. He watches her vent her anger toward the goddess who granted these flawed powers. The absurdity of their situation briefly distracts them, until a strange, low vibration catches his attention. The very ground beneath them begins to shift and groan as the cave walls ripple. They realize with mounting horror that the shelter they found is not a rock formation at all, but the massive, scaly body of a creature beginning to stir. She and her companion are suddenly jolted as a massive, stone-like limb crashes into the earth with a deafening impact. They look up in terror as the tremor reveals the true nature of their supposed shelter. The mountain itself begins to move, unveiling the colossal, armored head of a rhinoceros-like beast. Steam hisses from its nostrils as it looms over the two children, its small, pale eyes fixing on them with a primal intensity. The massive, stone-skinned beast towers over them, its presence announced by heavy, rhythmic thuds that shake the very ground. He and the girl stare up in frozen disbelief, their eyes wide as the sheer scale of the creature sinks in. Suddenly, she breaks the silence with a desperate cry for him to run, shoving him aside just as a jagged pillar of rock bursts from the earth where they stood. They both tumble to the dirt, gasping for air as the dust settles, their bodies trembling from the near miss. His bare feet find purchase on the uneven terrain, the cold grit of the stone grounding him as he prepares to move. He rises to his full height, a flicker of resolve crossing his face while the girl watches from the ground, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. Before she can react, he lunges forward and pulls her into a protective embrace, shielding her as she cries out in shock at the monstrosity's relentless assault. The colossus stomps again, and the earth groans, erupting into a forest of lethal, crystalline spikes that race toward them with terrifying speed. He doesn't hesitate, hoisting her into his arms and leaping through the air, narrowly evading the sharp protrusions that tear through the landscape. As they land amidst the chaos, his mind races with panic, wondering how they can possibly survive this onslaught while she stares at the devastation in stunned silence. He offers a determined, almost unsettling grin, reaffirming his vow to protect her. He declares his intent to fight, leaving his companion stunned by his sudden resolve. Ignoring her frantic questions about his plan, he lunges forward into the fray. She calls out in desperation, wondering if he has any strategy at all against such a monster. Suddenly, the earth shatters as jagged stone pillars erupt with terrifying speed. He realizes too late that this creature's power is on an entirely different scale than anything they've faced. The ground becomes a forest of death, catching him in a violent upheaval of rock. He is thrown into the air, his body battered by the rising spikes. A cry of agony escapes him as the sharp stone tears through his flesh. The onslaught is relentless, a chaotic blur of stone and blood as he is tossed like a ragdoll. Watching from the sidelines, she is paralyzed by the sight of the carnage. She knows his regenerative abilities are extraordinary, but even they have a limit, and this level of destruction is far beyond it. Blood sprays across the jagged terrain as he is repeatedly impaled. The realization hits him with crushing weight. He cannot even get close enough to strike. Slumped against a pillar of stone, his life's blood pooling on the cold ground, he looks up at the massive beast. His strength is gone, and in his fading consciousness, he taunts the creature, asking it to end his suffering. His eyes begin to glaze over, the world fading to gray as he waits for the final blow. He lies broken on the cold ground, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he contemplates his failure. He wonders if Runa will ever forgive him for breaking his promise, a bitter laugh escaping his lips at the thought of his own impending demise. Because of this resignation, he finds a dark humor in the situation, realizing that once he is gone, forgiveness will no longer matter. However, his grim reflections are suddenly interrupted by a sharp whistling sound as a small, bell-like object streaks through the air just inches from his face. The sudden intrusion draws attention away from his broken form toward the massive beast, which stands amidst a forest of jagged stone pillars. High above the carnage, a lone figure stands poised on a rocky outcrop, her presence a defiant challenge to the monster below. She draws her bow with practiced precision, her eyes narrowed in intense concentration as she prepares to release another shot. Below her, the boy watches in stunned silence, his mind racing as he realizes she hasn't abandoned him to his fate despite the overwhelming odds. With a piercing shriek, the projectile cuts through the wind, designed specifically to create a cacophony of noise to disorient the predator. The distraction works perfectly, the object clattering against the stone and drawing the colossal creature's gaze away from its intended prey. As the beast snarls, its massive jaws snapping in frustration, the jagged spikes it summoned remain as a testament to its overwhelming power. Meanwhile, the small, battered figure of the boy begins to stir in the shadow of the monster's massive bulk. He stares at his savior, his heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and confusion as he questions why she would risk everything instead of simply fleeing. The realization that she is still fighting for him sparks a flicker of renewed will within his shattered spirit, even as he struggles to find the strength to move. Driven by this newfound resolve, he forces his broken body to move, his teeth gritted against the agonizing pain. He knows he cannot let her fight alone. He must find the strength to stand and rejoin the battle, no matter the cost. He lunges forward, his fist connecting with a surface that feels as unyielding as solid stone. The shock of the impact travels up his arm, but his resolve doesn't waver even as he realizes the sheer density of the beast's hide. Driven by desperation, he rains down a flurry of blows, each strike accompanied by the sickening sound of skin splitting against the jagged, rock-like exterior. Blood begins to spray from his raw knuckles, painting the gray surface crimson. The relentless assault continues, a rhythmic thudding that echoes through the clearing as he pours every ounce of his remaining strength into the attack. Watching from a distance, she is gripped by a mixture of horror and confusion, unable to comprehend why he continues to push himself despite his battered and bloodied state. Behind him, the massive creature looms, seemingly unfazed by the frantic struggle. His eyes are narrowed with a singular, burning focus, ignoring the agony in his limbs as he prepares for another strike. As his fist connects once more, the realization finally dawns on her. He is truly prepared to sacrifice everything just to uphold his promise to keep her safe. With a guttural roar, he channels his entire being into a final, explosive punch that seems to vibrate with a strange, latent power. Under the incredible pressure of the blow, the impenetrable stone plating begins to spiderweb with deep fissures, the massive structure of the beast's armor finally starting to give way. He screams in defiance, his face contorted with effort and pain as blood drips from his brow, refusing to stop until the barrier is completely destroyed. The rocky shell finally disintegrates into a shower of debris, leaving her staring in stunned silence at the impossible feat he has just accomplished. He rubs the back of his head, a dull ache throbbing where he exerted himself, while Runa cries out in sheer relief that he is still standing and relatively unharmed. The young warrior sits amidst the jagged remains of the creature's stone hide, listening as she exclaims in disbelief at the impossible feat he just performed by taking down such a beast. He stares down at his trembling fists, the realization sinking in that he has once again achieved the unthinkable with nothing but his bare hands, wondering how his frail body is capable of such force. This leads him to ponder the strange evolution of his own body, where once such a strike would have shattered his bones against a tough hide. He now suspects that every injury he sustains only serves to forge him into something more resilient, making him tougher the more damage he takes. But before he can fully grasp this new reality, a sudden, invisible force tears through the air, bisecting his torso in a horrific spray of crimson as his mind struggles to register the fatal, unexpected blow. Hyono is sent hurtling through the air by a powerful force, his body a blur against the backdrop of high-speed motion lines. He slams into the earth with a bone-jarring impact, the ground shattering beneath him as he struggles to process the sudden assault. Amidst the chaos, a realization about the three powerful skills he possesses flickers through his mind, even as a massive, three-toed foot crushes the terrain nearby. While he struggles to recover, a rock rhino erupts from the depths of a jagged crater with a deafening roar, its stony hide glistening as it announces its presence to the battlefield. The young warrior lies dazed in the dirt, his eyes widening as he spots a much smaller, yet similarly armored creature scurrying amidst the rubble. Observing this from a distance, Kushina gasps in disbelief that the creature survived, while Runa notes that this specimen is significantly smaller than the behemoth they faced before. She continues to stare, her mind racing with the possibility that this new threat literally emerged from the remains of the massive rock they had just destroyed. While she watches in horror, he lets out a pained groan, trying to push himself up, only to find the miniature beast standing directly over him, letting out a sharp, aggressive cry. Before he can react, the small creature lunges with surprising speed, its hard snout slamming into his chest and launching him backward once again. The force of the blow sends him skidding across the dusty ground, the air knocked out of his lungs as he gasps in shock at the creature's unexpected power. He gritted his teeth, a pained grunt escaping his lips as he struggled to push himself off the cold ground. Before he could recover, the smaller beast struck with blinding speed, its movements a blur that sent him tumbling across the dirt. The relentless assault continued, leaving him no room to breathe as he was lashed by a flurry of strikes, drawing a desperate shout of her name from his lungs even as he was battered. She looked on, the realization sinking in that she stood no chance against such a foe, and that even his healing powers would fail under this relentless pressure. The speed of the beast was simply too great for any normal defense to hold. Gripping her staff, she knew she couldn't just stand by, watching as he was systematically dismantled by the unseen predator. She had to act, even if the odds were stacked against her. The creature's eyes narrowed, its predatory focus shifting as it locked onto a new target. Her breath hitched when she saw the beast turn toward her, its massive form suddenly lunging forward with lethal intent. A violent impact shattered the earth, sending shards of stone and dust flying into the air. The force of the blow sent her reeling, her body slamming into the hard ground as she let out a weak, pained moan. It stood over her then, a silent, stony monument of power, its shadow engulfing her fallen form. It lunges forward with predatory intent, its massive bulk hurtling toward the defenseless girl on the ground. Before the beast can strike, he throws himself into its path, a desperate tackle aimed at diverting its lethal momentum. The collision sends the creature skidding back across the dirt, its roar of surprise echoing through the clearing as he struggles to catch his breath. It recovers instantly, its low growl a promise of further violence while the girl cries out his name in a mixture of fear and relief. The monster strikes again with blinding speed, its horn carving a path through the air just inches from his retreating form. While the girl watches in terror, a grim realization takes hold of him. Though his own life may be protected by a strange immortality, his failure to move faster will lead to the death of those he cares for. As another devastating blow comes his way, he commands his limbs to respond with greater urgency, knowing that survival depends on pure speed. He pushes himself to the absolute limit, his face contorted with the effort of demanding even more from his straining muscles. His feet dig into the earth, bracing for the next exchange as the beast prepares to lunge once more. With a final, desperate burst of agility, he narrowly evades the crushing force of the attack, leaving the girl gasping at how close he came to disaster. She can only watch as the young warrior stands his ground, his muscles tensed while the beast's low growl vibrates through the air. He is suddenly blasted by a deafening, earth-shaking roar, the creature's massive jaws agape to reveal a cavernous maw of jagged teeth. The beast's display of power only causes him to narrow his eyes, his focus sharpening to a razor's edge as he prepares for his next move. It watches in confusion as he suddenly lunges, his body a streak of motion across the dusty ground, though a slight stumble forces a frustrated click of his tongue. The creature is left bewildered by the sudden burst of speed, its small eyes widening as a massive blur of movement cuts through the air. He doesn't let the slip slow him down, pushing off again with eyes wide in desperate intensity as he accelerates into a full-speed dash. He becomes little more than a shadow flickering across the landscape, his form nearly invisible to the naked eye as he pushes his physical limits. His velocity is so great that the massive beast can barely keep up, its head whipping around in a futile attempt to track the human whirlwind. He is eventually forced to the ground by the sheer exertion, his hands digging into the dirt as he commands his straining muscles to move even faster. From this desperate position, he launches again, a sharp whistling sound accompanying a literal line of force carved into the atmosphere. He maintains this impossible velocity, the blur of his movement leaving only a trail of displaced air in its wake. He pushes his body beyond its absolute limits, a single mantra echoing in his mind. He must go faster. Every fiber of his being is focused on accelerating, demanding more speed from his straining muscles as he realizes that his current pace is simply not enough to overcome the obstacle before him. The young man continues to accelerate, the world around him blurring into streaks of gray and white as he repeats the command to himself, his focus narrowing until nothing exists but the need for velocity. With his teeth gritted and his eyes narrowed in intense concentration, he feels his feet barely touching the ground, his internal monologue a constant, rhythmic drumbeat of faster that drowns out the sound of his own racing heart. Reaching a crescendo of effort, he lunges forward with desperate intensity, his hand outstretched and fingers tensed as he screams the command internally one last time, pouring every ounce of his will into a single, explosive movement. Suddenly, his hand clamps down on the massive, jagged horn of the beast, the impact sending a shockwave through his arm as the creature lets out a startled, pained grunt. He maintains his iron grip on the stony protrusion, his eyes wide with a mixture of adrenaline and predatory focus as he realizes he has finally made contact with his target. A dark, triumphant chuckle escapes him as he stares into the distance, a realization dawning that the beast is now within his grasp, and its momentum is his to command. A confident, almost manic smirk spreads across his face, sweat dripping down his chin as the thrill of the hunt takes over and his victory feels certain. Using the creature's own massive momentum against it, he heaves with all his might, sending the rock rhino tumbling backward in a chaotic cloud of dust and confusion. Having successfully upended the beast, he skids to a halt in a low crouch, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he prepares for the creature's next move. He lunges forward with explosive speed, closing the distance between himself and the massive beast in a heartbeat. As he reaches the creature, Kushina watches from the sidelines, her breath catching in her throat as she marvels at his incredible velocity, realizing he has finally matched the monster's pace. With a sudden, powerful movement, he seizes the rhino's primary weapon, his hands gripping the jagged stone of its horn. The beast's eyes widen in a moment of primal fear as it meets his unwavering, intense gaze. A sharp crack echoes through the air as the massive horn is snapped clean off, sent spinning away as the creature recoils from the sheer force of the impact. He stares down at his open palm in disbelief while the rhino lets out a deafening, agonized roar, its dominance shattered along with its horn. Reflecting on the moment, he admits to himself that he had always perceived his own power as insignificant compared to the beast's, never imagining he could possess such overwhelming strength. The severed tip of the horn lies discarded in the dirt, a silent testament to the shift in power as he stands firmly on the ground. A confident smirk plays across his lips as he realizes the momentum of the battle has finally swung in his favor. The massive beast stands defeated, its primary weapon shattered. Kushina stares in disbelief at the broken horn that once pulverized solid stone. Hyono clenches his fist, his gaze fixed on the creature as he recalls their previous encounters. This was the very monster that had relentlessly hunted and wounded his companion. Yet now it looks vulnerable and broken. Nearby, Runo watches the scene with a furrowed brow, her thoughts drifting to the nature of their foe. A strange thought crosses her mind. Perhaps the creature wasn't as formidable as they first believed, or perhaps something has fundamentally changed. She looks toward the young man's broad back, then back to her friend, her mind racing with a startling realization. A new possibility dawns on her. It wasn't the monster that was weak, but Kushina, who had somehow grown significantly more powerful than anyone anticipated. The beast's breath comes in ragged gasps, its massive frame trembling. It has reached its limit. Its legs give way with a heavy thud, and the monster slumps. The warriors watch the once unstoppable force crumble. Hyono remains focused, his mind racing with the tactical advantage. He realizes that in her current state, Kushina finally possesses the strength required to deliver the finishing blow. Suddenly, a low vibration rattles the air. Kushina's eyes widen as a dark shadow looms, signaling the battle is far from over. The creature throws its head back and unleashes a deafening, primal roar. The ground shakes with its pure, unbridled rage. Kushina recoils, shielding her face from a sudden, blistering wave of heat that feels like a furnace. The air itself begins to shimmer and burn, and she fears that if the temperature continues to climb at this rate, they will be consumed by the scorching wind before they can strike. She watches in terror as the young warrior lunges forward, his fist connecting with the beast's craggy hide with a deafening impact. He grits his teeth, pouring every ounce of his remaining strength into the strike, his eyes burning with a singular, desperate focus. His strike releases a shockwave so intense that Kushina is forced to shield her eyes, the sheer pressure of the air threatening to knock her off her feet. She is thrown backward as the ground trembles, debris raining down around her while the battle reaches its violent crescendo. The warrior drives his fist deeper with a final, guttural roar of effort, the force of the blow shattering the creature's supposedly impenetrable armor. He watches as the massive beast fails to withstand the onslaught. Its stony exterior cracks and splinters, sending jagged shards of rock flying into the air. It finally collapses, buried under the weight of its own shattered form and the surrounding rubble, the once mighty threat reduced to a heap of lifeless stone. The victor stands amidst the settling dust, his chest heaving as he struggles to catch his breath, the silence of the clearing a stark contrast to the preceding chaos. He looks down at his trembling hand and sees the cost of the victory. His knuckles are raw and bloodied, the skin torn from the sheer violence of the impact. The weary combatant exhales slowly, the tension finally leaving his body as he realizes the struggle has reached its end, muttering to himself that the ordeal is finally over. Kushina scanned the desolate, rocky landscape, her voice trembling as she called out for Runa. The silence of the aftermath was heavy, broken only by the sound of her own breathing amidst the rubble. He approached her slowly, his own body battered from the fight, and offered a quiet word of praise for her resilience. She could only offer a strained, hollow laugh in return, her eyes downcast as the adrenaline began to fade and the weight of their situation set in. The young woman collapsed onto the dusty ground, pulling her knees to her chest in a defensive posture. When he asked if she was injured, she insisted she was merely exhausted, though her trembling frame suggested a deeper emotional toll than she was willing to admit. She reminded herself of her lineage, whispering that as a member of the Kakyoin family, she was forbidden from showing such weakness or shedding tears. He watched her, sensing the immense pressure she placed upon herself to remain stoic even in the face of such devastation. He suddenly realized his own state of undress, standing exposed in the clearing. She snapped at him, her embarrassment turning into a sharp command for him to look away and not witness her in such a vulnerable, disheveled state, while he remained completely naked. They both scrambled to cover themselves, the gravity of the battle momentarily replaced by a frantic, awkward modesty. She shielded herself while accusing him of staring, while he desperately tried to hide his own nakedness from her sight, both of them flushed with shame. A piece of fabric was suddenly thrust toward him as she promised to manifest some temporary clothing. He caught the garment, grateful for any reprieve from the biting air and the mounting social discomfort. The warrior stood stiffly, now clad in a delicate school blouse and a pleated skirt that was far too small for his muscular frame. He thanked her for the effort, though his face burned with a new kind of intensity as he looked down at the ridiculous attire, noting how the fabric strained against his shoulders. She offered a sheepish apology, explaining that in her haste and exhaustion, she had inadvertently conjured a duplicate of her own uniform instead of something more appropriate for him. She looked away, unable to meet his eyes while he stood there in her clothes. Their voices and sudden, hysterical laughter echoed across the barren wasteland, a bizarre and human moment of levity amidst the ruins of their recent struggle. He sits in silence by the crackling campfire, the dense woods pressing in around them as the night deepens. The young man questions whether he should take the first watch or simply sleep, but his companion insists that their time is short and he must prioritize rest. He relents and settles into his makeshift bed, while she looks away, admitting a need for solitude to sort through her own thoughts. As he lies beneath the blanket, the stillness feels alien to him. In his previous life, he was always pushed to the limit, making this moment of forced idleness feel deeply unsettling. He continues to muse on the strangeness of his current situation, reflecting on the novelty of being thanked or even provided with clothing by another. Meanwhile, the girl remains by the dying embers, her mind drifting toward the abstract nature of skills and the magic-like powers that govern their reality. She glances back at his sleeping form, privately acknowledging her own inability to stand against the violent monsters they've encountered, yet noting that his abilities seem to operate on a different level entirely. Watching him rest, a realization dawns on her. Despite the odds, he is undeniably becoming more powerful with every passing hour. Her thoughts turn to the 3 specific traits she once deemed worthless: an indomitable spirit that refuses to break, a body that has ceased to age, and the ability to heal grievous wounds in an instant. He sits alone in the dark theater of his memories, the weight of her previous dismissal of those skills as useless still echoing in his mind. He recalls the initial agony of the battle, how his fists had shattered against the rhino's hide before they grew strong enough to pulverize stone through sheer repetition. The young warrior also remembers the desperate race, his legs eventually matching the beast's thunderous charge as his body adapted to the impossible pace. As the night wind rustles through the trees, a silent observer ponders the source of this impossible growth, suspecting it lies within those supposedly flawed abilities. She stares into the darkness, unable to ignore a burgeoning theory about the 3 skills everyone deemed worthless. Perhaps the world's assessment was fundamentally flawed. Looking down at the sleeping figure by the dying embers, she questions if their true power only manifests when they work in tandem, turning a survivor into something far more formidable. The subject of her thoughts remains deep in slumber, his face finally at peace after the day's brutal exertions. Soon, the harsh shadows of the forest give way to the soft, dappled light of a new dawn. He stirs as the morning light hits his eyes, momentarily disoriented by the transition from heavy dreams to the cold reality of the woods. Bolting upright, the youth realizes with a jolt of guilt that he slept through his watch, leaving the campfire to dwindle to nothing while they were vulnerable. A sudden realization softens his panic as he remembers they are no longer in the safety of their old home, but out in the unforgiving wild where every mistake carries a heavy price. He looks up in disbelief as the young woman looms over him, her arms hoisted high as she balances a massive, jagged stone. Kushina's gaze is vacant, her usual kindness replaced by a chilling, stoic resolve as she prepares to strike. She stares down at him, her eyes wide and glassy, as he stammers her name in a desperate attempt to reach her. Ignoring his plea, she leans in and softly asks if he would be willing to die for her, her voice carrying a haunting, unnatural weight that leaves him frozen in terror. She was a woman perpetually on the edge, her irritation simmering just beneath the surface until it inevitably boiled over into rage. Whenever she felt slighted or decided her son wasn't being considerate enough, her frustration would manifest in sudden, physical violence. The woman would strike him down, leaving the boy trembling on the floor, but the end of the assault only signaled the start of a different kind of torment. She would then pull him into a desperate, suffocating embrace, her voice thick with tears as she begged for his forgiveness. The weeping woman would lament her own failures, calling herself a terrible mother, which made it impossible for the boy to truly hate her despite the pain she caused. This cycle became the rhythm of his life, an apology followed by another strike, then another apology, only for the violence to return the very next day. He carried these scars into the present, knowing all too well that the human heart is inconsistent, capable of shifting from ally to enemy in a single heartbeat. The young man watched with a hollow sense of familiarity as his companion hoisted a heavy stone above him, the echoes of his past blurring with the present moment. He looked up at her with eyes devoid of hope, asking if she intended to kill him and admitting that he had already lost the will to continue living. She gasped in pure horror at his admission, her face contorting as she frantically tried to deny the dark conclusion he had reached about her intentions. She quickly clarifies her intentions, holding the heavy stone aloft while stammering that she has no desire to take his life, despite how the situation might appear. Because of her sudden outburst, he stares back with a hollow expression, prompting her to explain that her actions were merely a test within their current circumstances. Setting the heavy rock aside, she admits that her thoughts had been consumed by his unique abilities throughout the night, leading her to act impulsively to confirm a sudden realization. As they both settle onto the grass, she offers a sincere apology for the fright she caused, admitting it is a recurring flaw of hers before shifting the conversation back to the nature of his 3 distinct skills. With growing intensity, she proposes that these skills are not functioning in isolation, but are instead interacting with one another to produce an extraordinary, synergistic effect. In response to this theory, he looks on in silence as she asks if he has felt a tangible increase in his own physical power lately. The memory of his recent combat flashes through his mind, recalling the moment his fist connected with the massive beast, shattering its stony hide with a single, devastating blow. She points out the contradiction. He possesses no specific skills for physical enhancement, yet his raw strength is enough to fell monsters instantly, a fact that leaves him momentarily speechless. Continuing her analysis, she suggests that a specific set of conditions must have aligned perfectly to grant him this unexpected surge in capability. Stunned by the logic of her words, he can only stare blankly as the weight of this revelation begins to sink in. She cursed under her breath as a bag of cigarettes was tossed onto the counter with a sharp thud, the frustration of a mundane errand boiling over. Because of the clerk's insistence on age verification, she railed against the absurdity of the situation, shouting that her adult status should be obvious. She mocked the store's training and the requirement to provide a specific number for a brand as common as Loramin, her temper flaring at the perceived incompetence of the staff. Still fuming, she perched herself atop a nearby ledge, muttering about how society should be keeping a closer eye on reincarnators like herself. Nearby, Runa watched the display with a mix of confusion and mild alarm, unable to fathom why such a small matter had caused such an intense outburst. While she continued her tirade in the distance, Kushina stood over Kyono in a quiet park, her hands trembling as she hoisted a heavy, jagged rock. She looked down at his exposed arm, her expression a mask of reluctant determination as they prepared for a dangerous test. With a sharp intake of breath, she brought the stone crashing down with all the strength she could muster. Her strike was brutal, the rough surface of the rock scraping against his skin and drawing blood. He watched the wound form with a stoic intensity, his mind likely racing to understand why his supposed invulnerability had failed him in this moment. He remained in the quiet clearing despite the pain, urging her to try once more. He sat calmly on the grass, gesturing for her to reset and continue the grueling experiment to find the limits of his power. Because of his calm demeanor, she hesitated, her eyes filled with a growing sense of guilt as she looked at the blood on his arm. He quickly reassured her, explaining that there was no need for tension and that they had to keep pushing until they achieved the results they needed. His words gave her the strength to steel her resolve, and she raised the heavy stone high above her head once again, preparing for another strike. She was left breathless and drenched in sweat as the repeated exertion took its toll. She stared down, her face etched with the physical and emotional strain of having to repeatedly strike her friend in the name of discovery. She hesitates for a moment, the heavy stone trembling in her hands as she prepares to strike his outstretched arm. He watches with a steady, unblinking gaze, his resolve as firm as the limb he offers up for the test. With a sharp intake of breath, the young woman heaves the jagged rock upward before slamming it down with every ounce of her strength. Her face contorts with the effort, tears of exertion pricking at the corners of her eyes. The heavy mass collides with his forearm with a dull, sickening thud. The force of the impact ripples through the air, a testament to the raw power she poured into the blow. Instead of bone snapping, the stone itself yields, fracturing into a dozen pieces that fly off in every direction. He stares at the remnants of the rock, his expression a mix of grim satisfaction and lingering tension. Exhausted by the physical and emotional toll, she gasps for air, her hair disheveled and her skin slick with sweat. The weight of what she just attempted seems to crash down on her all at once. While she recovers, he examines his arm, finding it completely unscathed despite the violent impact. The experiment has yielded the results he sought, though the cost to his companion is evident in her slumped posture. He breaks the silence by asking if she is familiar with the concept of supercompensation, noticing her bewildered expression. When she asks if it's some kind of magical skill, he realizes how deep the misunderstanding goes. He clarifies that it isn't magic at all, but a natural biological process inherent to every human being. His tone is educational, stripping away the mystery of his perceived invulnerability. To illustrate his point, he describes how muscle fibers are intentionally torn during intense physical exertion. He explains that during periods of rest, the body doesn't just repair these tears, it reinforces them. This process causes the muscles to return thicker and more resilient than they were before. It is through this cycle of destruction and regrowth that he has forged a body capable of shattering stone. He continues his explanation, noting that the principle of supercompensation isn't limited to just muscle growth. As he flexes his arm, the definition of his training is clear, but he emphasizes that this biological law governs more than just the visible fibers. Because of this, even bones undergo the same process, becoming denser and stronger after healing from fractures. He clarifies that while a severed limb won't simply grow back for an ordinary person, the body's natural repair mechanisms are far more potent than most realize. This leads him to address her specific ability, rapid regeneration. He explains that while it can restore even major lost body parts, such a powerful skill can be undone by its own nature. As he clenches his fist, he points out the catch. Every time her body heals through this forced supercompensation, it technically grows stronger, but this rapid cycle introduces a grave problem. She begins to grasp the implication, realizing that if her regeneration is constantly triggering supercompensation, her body is undergoing an endless, accelerated state of cell division to keep up with the repairs. This process is governed by a fundamental biological limit. Cells can only divide a certain number of times. As they divide, the person ages, and once the limit is reached, the cycle stops, eventually leading to death. The gravity of the situation becomes clear as the explanation continues. Rapid regeneration has a finite number of uses. To exceed that limit is to invite an early grave, a price for such unnatural healing. However, she counters this grim reality by holding up 2 fingers, revealing that there is a way to bypass the flaw. She explains that her second skill, agelessness, serves as the perfect countermeasure. By remaining ageless, her cells never exhaust their division cycles, effectively removing the limit on her regeneration. He stares at her in shock as she adds a sobering caveat. While she may not age, she is not truly immortal. If she is killed, she stays dead. Her expression hardens as she prepares to reveal the final piece of the puzzle. She mentions a third skill, one that possesses the terrifying potential to overcome even death itself. She watches as the young man grips the wooden railing, his knuckles white with the effort of processing the truth about his unyielding spirit. Indomitable will. As they sit together in the quiet clearing, Kushina explains that this third skill acts as a failsafe, reviving him from the brink of death so long as his spirit refuses to surrender. She points out the contradiction in his heart. Though he claims to seek an end, his instinctual will to live is what keeps pulling him back. He remains silent, his eyes wide and sweat-slicked as the realization of his own subconscious desire for life clashes with his spoken words. Continuing her analysis, she describes how his three abilities form a perfect, self-sustaining loop, each one compensating for the other's limitations to ensure his survival and growth. He looks at her, his voice trembling as he asks if she truly understands the gravity of what she's describing. Overhearing the conversation, the pointed-eared woman is struck by a sudden wave of shock, her breath hitching as the nature of his power is laid bare. The bald warrior also feels the weight of the revelation, a grim smile of understanding crossing his face as the group stands together in the fading light. While the others process the news, he looks down, the words catching in his throat as he approaches the only logical conclusion left to him. Turning his gaze back to her, he finally speaks the terrifying truth aloud. The more he is forced to face death and return, the stronger he will inevitably become. He is left haunted by this realization, his gaze fixed on a future defined by an endless cycle of demise and rebirth. Kushina breaks down the terrifying mechanics of the young man's survival. She explains that his rapid regeneration forces constant cell division to heal his wounds, while agelessness removes the natural limits on that very process. When combined with grit, indomitable will, which keeps him clinging to life at the brink of death regardless of the injury, he has become something far beyond a normal human. She looks at him directly, driving home the final, staggering point of her analysis. The more he dies, the stronger he becomes. He can only stammer in response, the sheer absurdity of his situation leaving him breathless as the weight of her words sinks in. A disturbingly radiant smile slowly creeps onto his face as he considers the implications. He muses that anyone would be overjoyed to suddenly possess the power of the strongest without having to lift a finger, though the manic glint in his eyes suggests a mind pushed to its breaking point. The smile shatters into a raw, agonized scream. He bellows his frustration at the sky, recounting how even being hit by a car or dealing with the Yakuza failed to grant him an escape, leaving him stranded in this insane reality where even death refuses to take him properly. He continues his tirade against the god of fate, his voice cracking as he demands to know how much more suffering is expected of him. He wonders if the deity he encountered was truly the one pulling the strings of his destiny. He begins to move with a frantic, nervous energy, his eyes darting around as he searches for a solution to his immortality. His companion reaches out, pleading with him to calm down, but her voice is drowned out by his internal turmoil. He suddenly seizes a mushroom from the ground, reasoning that if external forces cannot end his plight, he must try to destroy himself from the inside. He ignores her terrified shout that the fungus is lethal, his desperation overriding all survival instinct. He gagged and retched, the toxic fungus already taking hold, as his companion screamed for him to purge the poison before it was too late. Instead of the expected agony, a look of pure bliss washed over him, and he declared the mushroom to be the most delicious thing he had ever tasted. As he continued to feast with reckless abandon, he claimed to feel an incredible surge of energy, leaving the young woman beside him torn between her fear and a growing, hunger-driven curiosity. Driven by her own starvation and his glowing review, she finally relented, taking a hesitant bite of the mushroom while reflecting on her struggle to find edible food in this harsh world. The effects were immediate and bizarre. He began to laugh hysterically, convinced the mushrooms were causing him to physically grow and shrink as the toxins began to warp his perception of reality. She watched in horror as his mind slipped further away, her concern turning to frustration when he began making nonsensical comments about her physical strength. His delusions took a darker, more eccentric turn, leading him to beg for a violent end at her hands, which only served to deepen her disgust and desperation to snap him back to his senses. Suddenly, he took off like a shot, his speed amplified by the body's frantic attempt to compensate for the poison, leaving her trailing behind in the dust. He sprinted toward the horizon, fueled by hallucinations of people in the distance, while she struggled to keep pace and pleaded for him to remember their promise to stay together. Their chaotic flight eventually brought them to the stone walls of a fortification, where a man peered down from a window and offered to grant the two weary travelers entry. He watches as the two travelers step into the heart of the settlement, a bustling town square nestled between sturdy stone buildings. He remains at his post as they pass through the inner gates, the scale of the architecture looming over them, the sun-drenched walls offering a stark contrast to the dark, oppressive forest they just escaped. She can hardly contain her joy, her voice ringing out in a jubilant cry at the sight of civilization, while beside her, the young man lets out a weary sigh of relief, his body still marked by the lingering effects of the toxic fungi. He notes with a grimace that the hallucinations are finally beginning to recede, though he admits with a dark sense of humor that he somehow managed to survive the ordeal. His companion, however, remains deeply unsettled by his haggard appearance. He watches as the sheer weight of their survival suddenly hits her, her legs giving way as she sinks to the ground in a heap of exhaustion, only to be startled by a rough but well-meaning voice offering assistance. A massive, battle-hardened warrior stands before them, fresh from a kill and still clutching the severed head of a beast, his presence radiating a raw, intimidating power that cuts through the air. He looms over her, his blood-stained appearance causing her heart to race as she fears they might have traded one danger for another. He sets aside his grim trophies and bursts into a thunderous laugh, the sound echoing off the stone walls as he explains that he mistook them for more monsters emerging from the woods, his initial hostility vanishing into boisterous amusement. He leads them to a nearby table where the tension finally dissolves into the clatter of wooden bowls and the aroma of roasted meat, the warrior jokingly apologizing for his overwhelming presence. She takes a bite of the simple bread, the taste of real food bringing tears of gratitude to her eyes after the nightmare they endured. She sits quietly as the one-eyed warrior leans in, slamming a pitcher onto the table. He remarks on their youthful appearance, admitting he initially mistook them for seasoned bounty hunters rather than the inexperienced novices they clearly are. He produces a parchment depicting a ferocious, simian beast, a storm ape. He warns them that these creatures, along with the dreaded rock rhinos, are so formidable that even a dozen veteran warriors would struggle to survive an encounter, making the potential riches of the bounty a distant, deadly dream. He warns that if they ever run into one, they should simply bolt. The young man is taken aback, questioning if it truly takes 10 people to fell a single beast. The tavern erupts with the guards' raucous laughter, their voices booming as they mock the idea of children seeking fortune in such a perilous land. They roar for more ale, telling the pair to simply embrace their fate should they be foolish enough to wander into the path of death. Amidst the boisterous celebration, the server approaches with a look of growing skepticism. She pointedly asks if they can actually pay for the feast laid before them, reminding them that the menial task they completed earlier hardly covers the cost of such indulgence. Ignoring the concern, the warriors suddenly stand and make a hasty exit, shouting back that the bill should be added to their mounting debt. The woman is left standing in their wake, balancing a precarious stack of empty dishes. She then turns her attention to the two newcomers, extending a long, itemized receipt. The sight of the total causes the pair to freeze in collective horror, the weight of their financial predicament suddenly crashing down. With a stern expression, she demands to know exactly how much coin they are carrying. The silence that follows is heavy, as they are forced to admit the truth. They haven't a single copper to their names. Left alone at the table, the only thing remaining is the bounty poster of the storm ape, a silent reminder of the dangerous world they are wholly unprepared for. The townspeople stare in disbelief as a massive, scaly tail is dragged through the dirt, the sound of its immense weight scraping against the ground echoing through the street. Kyono, unfazed by the burden, hauls the enormous carcass of the beast he just slew, casually inquiring about where he might exchange such a trophy for currency. He soon finds himself holding a single coin, inspecting its weight and luster before a heavy sack filled with similar pieces is dropped onto the counter with a satisfying metallic clink. While he ponders the value of their new wealth, Runa reveals she has already researched local prices for lodging and food, much to his surprise given how little time they've spent in town. She notes that while she doesn't know the exact value of the coins, it should be enough to cover their expenses for a while. Kushina joins the conversation, remarking on the ease with which he dispatched the creatures known as magical beasts, though he simply brushes off the praise as if it were expected. As they stand before a bounty board, Runa laments their missed opportunities, explaining that the pelts and meat of the monsters he previously defeated were worth a fortune. She points out that storm apes and rock dragons carry huge bounties, and it's a waste that they left the corpses behind in the forest. His gaze drifts to a peculiar, handwritten plea pinned among the official notices, a desperate request from someone begging for an end to their life, asking for someone to kill them. He stares at his own palm, a sense of detachment washing over him as he realizes that the monsters he faces seem increasingly fragile. He reflects on how he feels like he is drifting further away from death, even as he maintains his promise to protect Runa. The thought haunts him. If he continues to fight and regenerate without end, he wonders if he will eventually reach a state where death is no longer a possibility, trapped in an eternal cycle of combat. His grim reflection is interrupted by a young girl who approaches timidly, her voice trembling as she asks if they are truly capable of defeating the most powerful monsters. She stands before them, her voice trembling as she begs for justice. The plea is simple yet heavy. She wants the beast that took her father's life to be destroyed. The creature in question is a wind tiger, a legendary apex predator from the treacherous forest of Final Calamity. It is a beast that commands the very air, using gale force winds to shred anything in its path. Looking down at a crude but recognizable sketch of the striped predator, the child explains that her father was a seasoned adventurer, yet even he was no match for such a monster. Sensing the weight of the request, Kushina pulls the young man away from the table for a private word. She acknowledges the girl's pain but hesitates to commit to such a suicidal mission. She lays out the cold reality of their situation, arguing that risking their lives for a stranger against a foe far beyond their current strength is a fool's errand. However, he cuts through her logic with a blunt declaration. They are going to fight. The young woman stares at him in disbelief, questioning if he even heard a word of her warning. He meets her gaze with a chilling, wide-eyed grin, confessing a dark desire to finally find an end to his existence. To him, a beast as lethal as the wind tiger represents the perfect opportunity to achieve the death he craves. Horrified by his recklessness, she shouts a reminder of the curse he carries. If he charges into battle and falls, his body will simply reconstruct itself, returning even more resilient than before. She presses the point further, her voice filled with a desperate kind of dread as she warns that if this cycle continues, he will eventually become a being that no one, and nothing, can ever kill. The weight of her words seems to finally register. leaving him momentarily speechless. She explains that his innate skill, an indomitable will to survive, acts independently of his desires, trapping him in a loop where death is never the end. Hearing this, he realizes with grim urgency that if he is to find peace, he must do so before his power makes him truly untouchable. He shouts in frustration, his voice cracking as he demands to know what he should do. If his survival skill only triggers when he lacks the fear of death, he feels trapped by his own nature. In response, she offers a different perspective, suggesting that perhaps the skill wouldn't activate if he could find genuine joy in living. The young man repeats the word joy, as if it were a foreign concept, his brow furrowed in confusion. He asks how he is even supposed to begin looking for such a thing. She looks away, her expression softening with a hint of sadness. Turning back to him, she points out that he is currently blinded by tunnel vision, focused entirely on finding new ways to end his life. In response, he bluntly tells her that figuring out how to find joy is a task only she can handle. As they stand within the stone walls of the courtyard, she encourages him to start by simply learning more about the world they now inhabit. He considers her words for a moment, his gaze sharpening. He admits there is indeed one thing he wants to understand immediately. While their companion mentions the coin they've earned and their safety after escaping the forest, he remains fixated on his goal. He tells her that his desire to face the wind tiger is his own burden and has nothing to do with her. He then turns his focus back to his primary companion, bluntly asking why she is so intent on standing in his way. He calls her strange, but she quickly counters by reminding him that they came from the same world and have faced everything together. She insists she isn't heartless, just deeply invested in their shared journey. She stands firm, her voice soft but resolute as she tells him that she simply doesn't want him to be miserable anymore. He remains silent, his gaze shifting as he processes her words, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features for the first time. The young man clenches his fist tightly at his side, struggling with his own internal conflict, while she admits that her advice on how to suppress his skill might seem hypocritical given their circumstances. He looks away, questioning if avoiding the confrontation with the wind tiger would truly be enough to end his suffering, or if he is merely running from his destiny. With a candid shrug, she confesses that she honestly doesn't have the answer to that question, acknowledging the complexity of his burden. She continues, pointing out that it would be careless to promise someone happiness without any real proof, a sentiment he quietly acknowledges with a weary nod. Reflecting on their relationship, she notes that while they rarely agreed on anything, the experience of being with him still brought her a sense of joy, leaving him momentarily bewildered by her honesty. A gentle smile touches her lips as she reasons that his desire to avoid pain is, in itself, a hidden wish for happiness, a realization that leaves him stunned and speechless. Their private moment is suddenly interrupted when the young village girl approaches, curiously asking what they are discussing, which causes her to stammer in surprise while he remains lost in thought. The girl then delivers the grim news that they cannot face the wind tiger, prompting an immediate and shocked protest from her as the weight of their situation returns. She stood silently as the young girl offered a tearful apology, her voice trembling with the weight of their impossible situation. Hyono remained quiet, his face shadowed as he absorbed the gravity of the child's words. Without another word, the girl turned and bolted, her small form a blur as she disappeared into the distance. The two of them could only watch her retreat, the silence of the village settling heavily around them. She looked away, her expression clouded with a mixture of guilt and resignation, whispering to herself that this outcome was for the best. Hyono stood a few paces behind, his presence a steady but unreadable weight in the quiet afternoon. He suddenly broke the tension with a wide, unsettling grin that radiated an almost predatory cheerfulness. Horrified by the sudden shift, she recoiled, questioning if he truly took pleasure in being so cold to a desperate child. He maintained the eerie expression, casually reciting a proverb about how good fortune finds those who smile. The attempt at levity did little to ease her discomfort, as his grin seemed more like a mask than a genuine emotion. His gaze softened slightly as he confessed the simple, underlying truth. His actions were driven by a basic desire for happiness. It was a rare moment of vulnerability, revealing the personal stakes behind his stoic exterior. This pursuit of peace was the sole reason he had decided against taking up the fight. As the sun began to set over the quiet rooftops, the weight of his choice hung in the air, final and absolute. The next morning, he found himself waking up in a sturdy wooden bed within the safety of the inn. Outside the window, the gentle chirping of birds and the swaying of a tavern sign signaled the start of a new, seemingly peaceful day. He sat up and stretched his limbs, feeling more refreshed than he ever had on the worn-out futon of his past. The quality of the sleep was a welcome change, momentarily pushing aside the lingering tensions of the previous day. His peaceful morning was shattered when he discovered the bed was actually a monstrous mimic that had attempted to swallow Runa. The waitress stood by with a casual air, admitting she had been testing the creature's comfort for potential marketing, much to his utter disbelief. He remains surprisingly calm as the creature's gelatinous form envelopes him, even admitting that the experience is quite comfortable. The waitress reassures a frantic Kushina that the beast was brought in by an adventurer and has been rendered harmless, though Kushina remains deeply skeptical about the safety of such an arrangement. Despite her concerns, he continues to play with the creature, laughing as its soft, tentacle-like appendages tickle him. Kushina watches in silent disbelief, her expression flat as she processes his bizarre lack of fear toward the monster. After the strange morning encounter, the pair makes their way down the stairs of the inn. He suggests that they head to the market for supplies and take the opportunity to explore this new world, a proposal that Kushina meets with a spark of genuine interest. As they walk, he reflects on the prospect of discovery, his mind wandering to the possibilities that lie ahead in this unfamiliar land. Suddenly, the quiet of their walk is shattered by the heavy thud of a boot striking the ground. Both of them freeze, their eyes widening in surprise at the sudden intrusion. A group of armed men, identifying themselves as the town's watchmen, blocks their path. They immediately level a serious accusation, claiming the duo is under suspicion for assaulting other adventurers and poaching their magical beast kills. One of the watchmen leans in, his face set in a grim, uncompromising line. He coldly informs them that a trial will be held to determine their fate. With a final, chilling proclamation, he warns that if the trial finds them guilty, the punishment will be nothing less than death. The weight of the situation settles over the two travelers as they stand confronted by the law of the town. The young woman with the long, snow-white hair introduces herself with a cheerful peace sign, identifying as a hot-blooded reincarnator brought to this world by a random deity. Her name is Luna. Today, she has decided to review the local cuisine, starting with a meager meal of thin soup and 2 slices of bread. Examining the bread, she finds it as thin as paper, but with the unforgiving texture of an iron plate, wondering if the grains here are the same as those back home. Her inspection reveals a secret ingredient that is anything but appetizing: a vibrant patch of rainbow-colored mold. The danger is confirmed when a small mole rat, a frequent visitor she calls Luna, nibbles on the crust and immediately begins foaming at the mouth. Realizing the bread is a lost cause, she turns her attention to the soup, hoping it might at least trick her stomach into feeling satisfied. Upon taking a sip, she is met with the disappointing reality that the liquid is nothing more than flavorless hot water. This dismal meal is the highlight of her sparkly fantasy prison experience, as she stands dejectedly behind the heavy iron bars of a dungeon cell. Beside her, the young man with the messy black hair observes their surroundings, noting with a grim irony that this is his first time behind bars. His reflection is interrupted by a guard who approaches the window, harshly ordering the filthy criminals to stop their yapping and stay quiet. They both shout back in protest as the guard walks away, with Luna desperately explaining that they aren't criminals. She argues that Kushina hunted the monster and traded it unfairly, but her pleas seem to fall on deaf ears as the guard ignores their claims of innocence. He sat calmly in the corner of the cell, unfazed by the guard's shouting, and began to sample the moss growing on the damp stone walls, finding it surprisingly palatable. Beside him, his companion watched in horror as the jailer barked that only criminals would stoop to eating such filth, completely ignoring the young man's casual observation about the thriving vegetation. The man's authoritative facade crumbled instantly when a second, more official-looking guard appeared behind the bars, ordering the imposter to stop his charade. Caught in the act, the fake jailer clicked his tongue in annoyance, while the young woman recoiled in fear as the real officer threatened her with solitary confinement and starvation if the noise continued. He escorted the eccentric prisoner away, explaining to the confused duo that the man simply had a strange obsession with pretending to be a guard and should be ignored if he returned. She stood frozen, grappling with the absurdity of the situation and the realization that even within these walls, wealth dictated one's quality of life, allowing the rich to enjoy private cells and outdoor strolls while they languished in squalor. Her mind raced as she contemplated using her unique creation skill to escape, fearing that if they remained, they would be permanently branded as common criminals by the authorities. Before she could act on her desperate plan, a heavy footstep echoed in the corridor, and an official appeared at the cell door to announce that the church had summoned them both for an immediate hearing. The stern-faced captain, his features set in a grim mask of duty, declared the formal commencement of the court session. Within the grand, sun-drenched Hall of Justice, the two defendants stood before a crowded gallery as the judge demanded their names, prompting the young man to offer a hesitant, uncertain alias that seemed to confuse the court. Whispers rippled through the spectators as they recognized the prestigious family name, recalling legends of the stoic lineage that never shed a tear, while the young woman firmly confirmed her identity as Luna Kagami. He turned his gaze toward her, his expression unreadable as he admitted to himself that her true name had long been a source of quiet curiosity for him. He stands before the court, unfazed by the judge's demand for respect, silently admiring the weight of the surname he now carries. Beside him, the young woman looks on in bewilderment as the gravity of their situation begins to settle. As they stand there, the judge explains the mechanics of their fate, noting that a jury of randomly selected citizens will be the ones to determine their guilt or innocence. The stakes are suddenly made clear when the magistrate declares that the penalty for robbery is nothing less than execution, a revelation that leaves the girl trembling while her companion remains outwardly stoic. Seeking to move the proceedings forward, the judge calls upon the captain of the watch to provide a formal explanation of the alleged crimes. The officer steps forward, leveling a heavy accusation that the pair stole monster carcasses from other adventurers to claim the rewards for themselves, a blatant lie that leaves the girl gasping in disbelief. Amidst the murmuring crowd, the petite woman who had previously crossed their paths watches with a predatory grin, relishing the sight of their predicament. Seeing that familiar, smug face in the gallery, the realization dawns on the accused girl that this entire trial is merely a petty act of vengeance for her refusal to assist the woman earlier. Refusing to be silenced by the false testimony, she points out the lack of any formal victim report, while her partner demands that their supposed accuser be brought forth to face them. In response to their defiance, the captain produces a heavy sack of coin, questioning how two mere wanderers could possibly have amassed such a fortune in a single day of hunting. He slams a handful of coins onto the bench, emphasizing that the amount they possessed far exceeds what any average adventurer could hope to earn from a standard hunt, using their own success as evidence of their guilt. He continues his relentless assault on their character, pointing out that while the townspeople aren't adventurers, they can see the earnings are shockingly low for such a feat. Luna tries to interject, sensing the logic is flawed, but the murmurs of the crowd begin to swell. He explains that high-level hunts are the domain of skilled teams and meticulous planning, further casting doubt on how two newcomers could succeed alone. He frames their success not as skill, but as a statistical impossibility. He points a condemning finger at the pair, declaring their claims impossible and their methods shady. While the young woman beside him trembles with indignation, the dark-haired youth remains silent, his gaze fixed on the man orchestrating their downfall. This accusation ignites the crowd, who now shout for justice, convinced that if these two are allowed to go free, they will move from robbing adventurers to preying on the townspeople themselves. The atmosphere in the hall turns toxic with collective suspicion. They are now fully swayed by his rhetoric as he leans back, satisfied, noting that in this trial, the judgment of the people outweighs any individual facts. The seed of doubt has been planted deeply. The idea that they cheated is now the only truth the audience is willing to accept. His smugness is met with a sharp rebuttal as she shouts that the entire proceeding is insane, arguing that a crime cannot exist without a victim to report it. She realizes with a jolt of panic that the captain is successfully dictating the rhythm of the trial. She challenges the court to produce this supposed victim, her voice echoing through the chamber as she demands proof of their existence. In the background, the architect of this scheme watches with a cold, calculating smirk. Her demand is silenced by a roar as he commands order, the guards leveling their spears toward the defiant girl. The sudden display of force effectively cuts off her protest, leaving her gasping in the face of such blatant intimidation. He dismisses her logic as nonsense, asserting that in this town, adventurer fraud is a dire threat to public order that must be crushed. To him, the mere fact that they received such abnormal earnings in a single day is evidence enough of their guilt. His cold dismissal forces her to turn in a final, desperate plea, begging the girl who witnessed their struggle to speak up and tell the truth. However, the witness remains silent, her expression unreadable as the weight of the false accusations settles over the room. She stood in stunned silence as the weight of the accusations grew, but her companion found the situation strangely familiar. He recalled how his own parents used to blame him for every misfortune, much like the groundless hostility currently filling the room. Despite the cold reception, she continued to insist that they had truly defeated the monsters, pleading with the silent girl to speak up. Her desperate calls for acknowledgement were met with a chilling indifference, as the other girl remained quiet, adhering to a lesson he knew all too well. Sometimes, silence is the only safety. Seeing her struggle, he stepped forward with a dark, unsettling grin that caused her to gasp in surprise. He offered to prove their claims right then and there, his expression turning predatory as he challenged the authority of the court. His attempt to seize control of the narrative seemed to backfire instantly, as she realized his terrifying demeanor was only confirming the crowd's worst fears. The onlookers recoiled, whispering that his sinister smile was surely the same one he used to lure unsuspecting adventurers into his traps. The official sensed the peak of the tension and cleared his throat, calling the room to order. He announced that the time had finally come for the jurors to deliberate and decide whether the two outsiders were guilty of the crimes they stood accused of. She could feel the malice in the air as the townspeople openly voiced their deep-seated distrust, their murmurs forming a wall of prejudice. The situation had turned dire, and the hope for a fair judgment was rapidly slipping away. The girl who had remained silent finally offered a hollow apology for her lack of help, to which she responded with a weary sigh, having expected nothing more from the start. Meanwhile, he watched the shifting mood of the room, realizing that the tide had turned completely toward a guilty verdict and that he would need to intervene. He contemplated the grim reality of his get stronger by dying skill, a power that brought him no personal joy. Yet, seeing that his actions could bring even a small amount of happiness or relief to his companion, a faint, genuine smile touched his lips as he accepted the path ahead. Looking toward the girl who had failed them, he acknowledged that while the local justice system was clearly broken, he might have let his own growing power go to his head. He realized that their current predicament was a direct consequence of the very strength they possessed. He turned to his companion with a look of absolute resolve, firmly telling her not to give up. He vowed to fight back against the blatant unfairness of the trial, standing as a shield against the mob's bias. He watches in silence, his dark eyes narrowed as he absorbs the weight of the moment. Beside him, Luna finds her voice, her tone sharp with defiance as she confronts the jury. She demands to know if they truly intend to execute them based on nothing more than unfounded prejudice, pointing out the glaring absence of any evidence linking them to a robbery. He is struck by how she has single-handedly shifted the heavy atmosphere of the room. Even as she stands completely alone against their judgment, her resolve remains unshaken. He realizes the dire stakes. Unless this plea sways the vote, their execution is certain. He silently hopes her words can pierce through the cold indifference of the relatives gathered there, reaching whatever humanity they might have left. While he knows he possesses the strength to escape this place on his own, a new desire takes root within him. He decides that he wants to stay, to truly understand the intricacies and the people of this strange world. Suddenly, the tension snaps as a guard moves to restrain him, forcing him to suppress his instincts. He reminds himself that these men are merely people following orders, not the monsters he is used to fighting, and he must carefully temper his strength. His efforts to remain passive are shattered when a massive gargoyle shatters the stained glass above, its stony form descending into the courtroom with a deafening crash. Meanwhile, panic erupts instantly as the crowd screams in terror at the unexpected ambush. While the guards scramble to draw their weapons, Luna can only watch in frozen horror as the beast looms over the chaos. Seeing the immediate threat, he lunges forward, his movements a blur as he delivers a powerful strike to the creature's midsection. His powerful strike sends the gargoyle reeling back through the air, leaving the nearby guard gasping in disbelief. As the dust settles, he stands protectively before Luna, his gaze fixed on the remaining threat. He stands amidst the wreckage, his gaze fixed on the devastation he wrought. A chilling realization takes hold as he admits to himself that he simply couldn't do it. He was unable to restrain the sheer force of his power, failing to hold back even as the courtroom crumbled around him. A monstrous gargoyle collapses, its stone-like form hitting the ground with a heavy, final thud. He stares at the fallen beast in disbelief, his hands trembling slightly as the crowd around him begins to murmur in shock. He can hardly process the fact that a single, desperate blow was enough to bring such a creature down with such ease. Standing by a high stone window, he tries to steady his breathing while the weight of his new reality sets in. The 3 skills he was granted, once seemingly useless, are proving to be a power far beyond anything he imagined, marking him as something formidable. His mind races back to the courtroom, recalling how he had considered striking a guard just to escape the blatant injustice of the trial. Looking down at his palm, he realizes that the sudden appearance of the monster forced his hand, leaving him no room to hold back his strength in that frantic moment. A cold sweat breaks across his brow as the terrifying truth dawns on him. If he had unleashed that same force on a human being, they would surely be dead. This power is volatile and absolute, a force he has yet to learn how to master or restrain. When a guard dares to approach him with a leveled spear, he reacts instinctively, snapping the metal tip off with his bare hands as if it were mere kindling. He warns the trembling man that any further contact would result in far more than a simple injury, his expression twisted by the stress of his own lethality. He trudges away with his shoulders slumped, a deep sense of melancholy washing over him. The realization that his touch is now a lethal weapon fills him with a quiet dread, fearing he may never again be able to pet a dog or a cat without causing them harm. The heavy, rhythmic clank of metal on stone echoes through the street as a pair of polished armored boots comes to a halt nearby. Agato strides into the clearing, his eyes scanning the wreckage of the gargoyle with a casual, almost bored curiosity. As the townspeople call out his name in relief, he notes how unusual it is to find such a creature in the heart of the city. He arrives to a chorus of relief, his presence immediately calming the agitated crowd. The townspeople cheer, hailing him as the strongest adventurer in the city, a beacon of security in the wake of the gargoyle's appearance. Looking down at the crumpled remains of the beast, he expresses genuine surprise that the threat has already been neutralized. Behind him, the young man who actually struck the blow stands in silence, his expression clouded with a complex mix of guilt and confusion. Turning his attention toward the disheveled youth, he questions the nature of the trial that was taking place. He points directly at the boy, seeking confirmation that this unlikely figure was indeed the one responsible for the creature's swift demise. The sharp-tongued girl steps forward to clarify the chaotic events, explaining that the 2 newcomers were initially suspected of robbing other adventurers because their feat seemed impossible. He listens intently, his eyebrows rising in genuine impressed wonder at the revelation that the boy took the gargoyle down with a single strike. As the truth of the robbery is revealed to be a massive misunderstanding, the heavy atmosphere in the hall evaporates into a wave of boisterous laughter. The townspeople mock the absurdity of the situation, their fear replaced by the casual mirth of a crisis averted. With the immediate danger and legal tension resolved, the crowd begins to disperse from the large hall. The 2 companions stand together amidst the emptying benches, still processing the rapid shift from being accused criminals to being the center of a misunderstanding. Despite the girl's visible irritation at his overly casual demeanor, he remains unfazed, simply suggesting that it is time for everyone to head home. She fumes at his lack of gravity, but the command signals the end of their ordeal in the courtroom. He leans in to check on the white-haired girl, his voice softening as he asks if she sustained any injuries during the commotion. He then turns a knowing gaze toward her companion, noting with a smirk that the boy had told a rather significant lie regarding his own capabilities. Approaching the stern official behind the bench, he acknowledges that while the pair are just children, some form of restitution for the chaos is necessary. He proposes a compromise, suggesting that they have learned their lesson and asking the captain to settle the matter without further escalation. While the girl continues to grumble about the unfairness of the situation, he leaves the final details in the capable hands of the captain. The official gives a curt nod of agreement, finally bringing the long, harrowing day of accusations and monsters to a formal close. He had barely finished delivering his judgment when Kushina began to voice her doubts. She questioned how a flying beast could have possibly breached such formidable city walls, suggesting the entire incident felt staged and illogical. Her skepticism was interrupted by the sudden appearance of the energetic adventurer, who leaned in with a knowing smirk. He asked if the situation seemed a bit too convenient for their liking, his eyes gleaming with mischief. Without waiting for an answer, he clapped a hand onto Muto's shoulder and insisted that the group follow him immediately, leaving no room for protest. As they hurried away, the young man grew anxious, eyeing the gargoyle horn the adventurer had claimed. He worried that being caught with such a prize would lead to a far harsher sentence if the authorities discovered them. Despite the recent settlement, while they made their exit, a group of rough-looking men watched from a nearby table, their eyes following the party with curiosity and suspicion. One of them, a man with a scarred face and an eye patch, wondered aloud where the group was heading in such a rush. The tension of the escape culminated in the heavy thud of the gargoyle's horn being placed firmly onto a wooden surface, now safely away from prying eyes. Relieved that the immediate danger had passed, the silver-haired girl let out a soft sigh, leaning her staff against a tree as she reflected on how smoothly their plan had unfolded. The blonde adventurer then turned to the newcomers with a bright, confident smile to offer a formal introduction. He identified himself as Agato and presented his companion as Ricardo, claiming they were well-known adventurers within the city. Hearing this, the short-haired girl confirmed his lofty reputation, explaining that he was widely considered the strongest and most trustworthy figure in town. Despite this glowing endorsement, Muto remained wary, pointing out that the timing of Agato's intervention was suspiciously perfect. The seasoned warrior let out a hearty laugh at the accusation, finally dropping the facade. He cheerfully admitted that the entire ordeal had indeed been a carefully orchestrated charade designed by his team. He continues his explanation, revealing that the gargoyle was nothing more than a hollow prop designed to create a diversion. His original plan had been to whisk them away during the ensuing panic, but he admits he hadn't expected the young man to clear his own name through sheer competence. This revelation sends the young man into a spiral of existential dread, as he laments the loss of his simple joys, like the comfort of a friendly animal's touch, even as he absent-mindedly strokes a small creature. He feels a new darkness taking root within him, mourning the innocence he can never reclaim. Meanwhile, the petite girl scoffs at the deception, noting that while the beast looked convincing from a distance, its true nature as a collection of branches and scrap was painfully obvious upon closer inspection. The silver-haired girl adds that her abilities have their limits, explaining that the illusion's form and movement were the best she could manage. Her companion is left reeling, stunned that such a convincing ruse was the product of magic and that it had gone entirely undetected by the court. Despite the technicalities, the blonde youth flashes a triumphant grin, declaring the operation a total success because they are all standing there alive instead of facing an executioner. The dark-haired youth confronts him with a cold, direct question, demanding to know the true purpose behind this elaborate charade. The sudden shift in tone catches the others off guard. The blonde leader's expression softens, his eyes narrowing as he considers the weight of the inquiry. He begins to respond, hinting that his intervention wasn't merely an act of selfless charity, leaving the true motive hanging in the air as they stand together in the quiet aftermath. The young man's gaze is sharp and unwavering as he is questioned about his true purpose in this place. He laughs off the tension, walking alongside his companions as they realize their secret might not be as safe as they had hoped, though they continue their journey regardless. Elsewhere, a gloved hand grips a parchment depicting a gnarled, ancient tree, questioning if this is indeed a mission for the subjugation of a monster. High atop the city walls, two guards examine the same notice, marveling at the staggering reward offered for such a task and wondering if it's worth the risk. They look out toward the horizon where the immortal tree stands, a massive entity that is classified as a magical beast despite its plant-like appearance. One of them explains that the tree's sap is a priceless component, essential for those seeking to master high-level magic skills. The lure of such wealth is so strong that he even considers abandoning his post to become an adventurer, though his partner quickly warns him to put such foolish thoughts aside. They both know that harvesting such a prize is no simple feat, requiring something far more extraordinary and difficult to obtain than mere effort. With a chilling, wide-eyed grin, the elder guard mutters the true, dark cost of the harvest, a living sacrifice. Unaware of the grim price required, the small group finally reaches the base of the towering, white-rooted giant as it looms over them. Standing before Kushina, the young man repeats the grim demand to become a sacrifice, the weight of the guard's words hanging heavy in the air. She explains that their goal is to harvest the tree's sap, but she questions if he is truly prepared for the physical toll such a task requires. He lowers his gaze for a moment, processing the gravity of the situation, before offering a silent, resolute nod. Beside him, Luna watches with a look of deep concern, her voice soft as she asks if he is absolutely certain about this dangerous path. The massive, gnarled trunk of the immortal tree looms over them, its bark thick and ancient. Agato notes that Luna seems particularly interested in the magical properties of the sap they are about to collect. Kushina elaborates on the rarity of such materials for high-level magic, while Muto remains quiet, haunted by his inability to act during his previous trial and the feeling of being a mere observer in his own fate. With a sudden surge of conviction, he declares that while he may feel powerless in many ways, the one thing he can offer is his own physical endurance. He vows to see the task through and put his body on the line, no matter the cost. Agato watches the young man's display of resolve with a thoughtful expression, though he admits that the term sacrifice sounds perhaps a bit too dramatic for the reality of the situation they are facing. He then gestures toward the towering tree, explaining that the moment its bark is pierced for the sap, the magical beast will lash out, using its massive roots to strike at the harvester. Muto listens intently, asking for the reason behind such a violent reaction from the flora. The explanation is simple. The harvester is called a sacrifice because they must withstand the tree's relentless assault without fighting back until the collection is complete. Luna listens, her understanding of the danger growing as the true nature of the sacrifice is revealed. Agato begins to prepare his equipment, pulling out a sturdy jar and suggesting that further talk is useless compared to the reality of the experience they are about to undergo. A simple clay vessel is soon suspended by ropes, ready to catch the precious fluid that will soon be drawn from the heart of the ancient tree. Agato leaps into action, his movements fluid as he reaches the designated spot on the massive trunk. With a practiced motion, he drives a small tap into the bark, securing a collection jar beneath it. Almost immediately, a thick, viscous liquid begins to ooze from the puncture, falling in slow, rhythmic droplets into the waiting vessel. Standing below, the group watches the slow progress. Luna peers up, her voice tinged with uncertainty as she questions how long this process will take, while Muto remains silent and observant. Her companion doesn't answer immediately, his gaze fixed on the surrounding environment. Suddenly, Agato's expression sharpens, and he warns them that the tree's reaction has finally begun. The ground and the air itself seem to tremble as the immortal tree's dormant defenses awaken. Massive, gnarled roots begin to uncoil and lash out with terrifying speed. The scale of the assault is overwhelming, with wooden appendages the size of pillars thrashing through the air. Luna cries out in alarm, her eyes wide as the sheer pressure of the movement buffets them, while Muto braces for the impact. Amidst the chaos, the dark-haired youth stands his ground, his body tensed as he prepares to endure the onslaught. The roots whip past him, shattering the very air with their force as he focuses on his role as the sacrifice. The violence intensifies, the roots striking blindly at anything in their vicinity, creating a deadly thicket of moving timber that threatens to crush everything in its path. Navigating the mayhem with surprising agility, Agato explains the grim reality of their situation. He reveals that the only way to successfully harvest the sap is for one person to draw the tree's ire, acting as a living distraction while the others make their escape, leaving the sacrifice behind to fend for themselves. This revelation sparks immediate outrage from Luna, who realizes they have been led into a trap. She demands to know if he intended to sacrifice them all along, while Agato frantically tries to reassure her that he has no intention of letting them actually die. She watches as the young man rejects the idea of a sacrifice, his voice firm with the conviction that they will all make it out together. He insists that he sought their help specifically to avoid such a grim outcome, refusing to let anyone be left behind. He is met with her sudden resolve as she grips her staff tightly, declaring her intention to stand and fight alongside them. She urges the group to hold their ground, her eyes filled with a new, fierce determination. She then unleashes a crystalline burst of magic that shatters the encroaching roots, prompting a surprised exclamation from the blonde leader about the sheer power of her sorcery. He estimates they only need to endure until the collection jar is filled, which might take until morning. She is praised by the leader, who lets out a boisterous laugh and explains that the tree's movements will naturally slow once the sun goes down. He suggests that they can take turns resting once the intensity of the assault diminishes with the light. He turns his attention to the short-haired woman, reminding her that they recruited her for her specific talents and that the goal is for every single one of them to return safely. He emphasizes that her strength is vital to their collective survival. He is joined by the dark-haired youth, who nods with a face etched by the strain of battle but eyes burning with determination to hold the line until nightfall. The young man commits himself to the defense, knowing the importance of reaching that sunset milestone. He watches as the petite woman erupts in frustration, her face contorted in a shout as she demands to know if they truly believe she has the power to handle everything on her own. Her outburst reveals the immense pressure she feels as their primary defender. She continues her tirade, berating the leader for bringing so few people and putting the entire burden of the operation's success on her shoulders, while he offers nothing but sheepish apologies. She warns that the entire mission could collapse if they continue to rely so heavily on a single person. She is observed by the youth, who remains silent as the weight of their desperate situation and the internal friction within the group presses down on him. He realizes that their unity is as fragile as their physical defense against the tree. He listens as the blonde leader's expression shifts to one of gravity, beginning to reveal a deeper truth regarding the wind tiger. The mention of this name brings a sudden, heavy silence to the group as they await further explanation. He began to recount the legend of the wind tiger, a beast far more formidable than anyone had anticipated. A massive subjugation force had once been assembled to eliminate the threat, and he had been among their ranks, hoping to put an end to the creature's reign of terror. The mission, however, ended in a catastrophic failure. As he recalled the carnage, the memory of the beast's overwhelming power remained vivid. Most of the unit was slaughtered, and those few who survived were left with grievous wounds that would never truly heal, both physically and mentally. He pulled back his clothing to reveal a jagged, heavily bandaged scar across his torso, a grim souvenir of that encounter. He admitted that he likely would have perished then and there if not for the timely intervention of Ricardo's healing magic, which had barely managed to close the wound. Looking at the old wound, the young woman expressed her deep concern, noting that he was still far from fully recovered and shouldn't be pushing himself in another fight. He merely laughed it off, insisting that using precious magic on a lingering injury like his would be a waste when others needed it more. He stood firm, asserting that he was still capable of movement and combat despite the pain. He explained the harsh reality of their situation. There simply weren't enough magical supplies to treat every adventurer, and he refused to be a burden on their limited resources while the threat remained. For him, continuing the fight was a matter of duty, a burden he carried as one of the few who made it back alive. He confessed that his knowledge of Kushina was the primary reason he had led them into this specific conflict, believing that her unique abilities were their only hope for success. A heavy silence settled over the woods as the weight of his stories sank in, the distant trees standing as silent witnesses to the tragedies of the past. Nearby, the rhythmic drip of the dark sap into a metal basin served as a reminder of the task at hand, even as hands tightened around their tools in anticipation of the next struggle. The quiet was suddenly pierced by a frantic command to retreat, as the surrounding environment seemed to turn hostile once more. They were urged to move quickly, the urgency in the voice leaving no room for hesitation as they scrambled to escape the encroaching danger. Eventually, they found themselves back within the safety of the stone walls, the adrenaline fading to leave only a crushing sense of weariness. The young man let out a long, heavy sigh, the physical and mental toll of the day finally catching up to him. He flexes his arm, testing his strength as the adrenaline of the recent battle begins to fade. Kushina observes him, noting with a hint of surprise that despite bearing the brunt of the combat, he appears remarkably unfazed. He admits that a side effect of his abilities seems to be a dampened sense of physical exhaustion, a revelation that leaves her momentarily envious of his unnatural stamina. Nearby, Agato clutches a small container of precious sap, offering a sheepish apology for the risks he forced the group to take, though he remains grateful for their success. However, the gravity of their situation is quickly underscored by a healer's grim assessment. The meager amount they recovered is nowhere near sufficient to treat the growing number of wounded. This dire news causes Kushina to fall into a pensive silence, her gaze drifting as she processes the logistics of their mission. She questions the efficiency of their current sap collection methods, pointing out that with infections and illness spreading rapidly among the survivors, a more drastic approach is required if they are to make any real difference. Turning back to her companions with a sudden, sharp glint of ambition in her eyes, she makes a startling proposal. She suggests, with a confidence that borders on arrogance, that they should hand over every drop of the life-saving resin they have collected directly to her. The suggestion is met with immediate and vocal resistance, as the others argue that such a move would deprive the many critically injured patients of the immediate care they desperately need. She remains unmoved by their pleas, coldly dismissing the current distribution plan as a failure and promising that she will provide a far greater reward in exchange for their total cooperation. As Agato and the others stare in stunned disbelief, she begins to walk away, her posture radiating an unshakable sense of purpose. She ignores their confusion, her mind already several steps ahead as she prepares to leverage the scarce resource for a much larger play. Finally, she turns back one last time, her expression one of cold, calculating determination as she stands before the looming towers of the city. She doesn't ask for their help. She demands their allegiance, telling them plainly that if they want to see their efforts truly bear fruit, they must choose to invest everything in her. The teacher stands before the chalkboard, calling upon a student to share her aspirations for the future with the rest of the class. She stands up promptly, her expression a mix of resolve and youthful anxiety as the eyes of her classmates turn toward her in anticipation. Just as she begins to voice her dreams, a sudden, loud clatter at the classroom door cuts her off mid-sentence, startling everyone in the room. A man bursts into the room, gasping for air and clearly disheveled, relieved that he managed to arrive just in time for the presentation. She can only stare in silent exasperation, her cheeks flushing with the familiar sting of embarrassment at his dramatic and unannounced entrance. This was a recurring theme in her life. Her father, despite his status as a company president, preferred the grit of the workshop over the polish of the office, often appearing in his stained work clothes. He would often speak of the workshop with a reverent tone, explaining that the act of creating something from nothing was the truest form of magic he knew. To share this passion, he had crafted a simple wooden bow for her, urging her to take aim and see what she was capable of achieving. With a sharp snap, the arrow flew, striking the target with such violent force that the impact echoed through the room like a thunderclap. He stood back in genuine shock, worried that the sheer power of the shot might have hurt her, while she looked on, bewildered by the strength she had just unleashed. She stares at her small hands, still trembling from the raw power she just unleashed. Her father kneels beside her, his voice soft as he apologizes for the shock, explaining that her ability is a rare form of magic, one that creates abundance from nothing. He promises that once she grows a bit more, he will enroll her in an archery school to help her master this gift. He continues, marveling at how she crafted a functional bow entirely on her own, despite his company usually focusing on complex machinery like cars and airplanes. He reminisces about his own youth, spent wandering through various factories and observing the meticulous work of master craftsmen, a passion he clearly sees reflected in her. Because of this shared spark, he assures her that he has no intention of forcing her to inherit the family business if her heart lies elsewhere. His only wish is for her to possess the knowledge and resilience needed to navigate whatever hardships the future might hold. With a confident, encouraging smile, he emphasizes that the magic of creation she possesses will be the very strength that allows her to overcome any obstacle in her path. The young girl listens intently as he expresses his desire for her to learn as much as possible, his eyes shining with pride at her hard work and potential. Inspired by his words, she looks up with newfound resolve, declaring her intention to grow into someone truly remarkable. However, the warmth of that memory fades into a cold, harsh reality where neither her father nor his grand company exists. She finds herself alone in a world that feels alien and unforgiving, the weight of her isolation threatening to crush her spirit. Despite the despair, she clings to her identity, reminding herself that she is a daughter of the Kagami line. She refuses to let her father's legacy be tarnished by weakness or shame. Standing amidst the quiet of the wilderness, she reflects on the fundamental lesson he taught her: the power to create something from nothing. With a sharp, determined gaze, she resolves to use that very magic to tear down the walls surrounding her and forge her own destiny. She walks alongside her companions, carrying a heavy load. Kagami offers his assistance, but she insists it's fine, though she admits she's unsure what the item actually is. Kushina suggests that if Luna can create things with her skill, she should just make them on-site. As they travel, the memory of the false accusation looms over them, a reminder that Kushina's overwhelming power is what led to their current predicament. They are irregulars in this world, and their presence could easily spark further discord among the local population. She continues the conversation, emphasizing the need to keep their abilities a secret from Agato and the others. Kagami listens intently, absorbing the gravity of their situation as they move through the forest. Turning to him with a serious expression, she warns him to never mention being a reincarnator to anyone. She points out that his behavior is already suspicious enough to draw unwanted attention, and he solemnly agrees to remain silent. Their private discussion is interrupted by a shout from the distance. Agato and Sia are waiting for them further up the path, waving enthusiastically to catch their attention. Once they regroup, the energetic young man asks if they are truly planning to follow through with the plan they discussed the previous day using Luna's unique magic. He seems curious about how her technology and wisdom will manifest. She steps forward toward a massive, ancient tree, her resolve hardening. She announces her intention to revolutionize the way they collect sap, making the dangerous task efficient and accessible for everyone. This display of confidence earns her high praise from Sia, who is moved by what she perceives as a selfless, philanthropic spirit. Luna basks in the admiration, striking a proud pose as she accepts the compliment. However, her internal thoughts are far more aggressive as she clenches her fist, imagining using her physical magic to guide anyone who dares to steal their resources. Kagami watches her, silently questioning if philanthropy is really the right word for her motivations. The young man leans in, admitting that if he were in her shoes, he would definitely have an ulterior motive. He finds it hard to believe she's acting out of pure charity for people who initially tried to kill them, prompting a sharp rebuke from Kagami to stay quiet. Luna continues her explanation, suggesting that if they can obtain enough sap, they could use magic more freely. Agato listens, his expression guarded as he processes her logic. She then makes a direct plea, asking him to teach her the ways of magic. She acknowledges her potential lack of innate talent but insists on trying, noting that even practice consumes valuable sap. He finds her reasoning sound enough to consider. With a thoughtful look, he asks if she is prepared to meet his specific conditions for such an exchange. He makes it clear that simply consuming the sap is out of the question, his gaze steady and serious. The young man emphasizes the gravity of their situation, pointing out the many wounded who are still awaiting treatment. He cannot afford to waste time or vital resources on a plan that might not succeed. Despite his reservations, he admits the current collection method is insufficient. He offers her a third of the available sap, but sets a strict deadline. She has until tomorrow morning to prove her method works. She accepts the terms without hesitation. She vows that if a better solution isn't found by the deadline, she will abandon her pursuit of the sap entirely. Without wasting a moment, she begins her trial. She raises her crescent-topped staff, channeling her energy toward the massive tree as the others watch in anticipation. The ground erupts as thick, gnarled roots burst forth from the earth, responding to her magical call with violent force. While the others look on in shock, she remains focused on the writhing roots. She observes that their movements seem sluggish compared to how they behave during the day, confirming her suspicions about the environment's influence. She explains the nature of the undying tree, noting that its vitality is tied to the sun. Without photosynthesis at night, its movements become sluggish, and she reasons that stripping its leaves would further deplete its energy, making it easier to handle. Her companion, Agato, considers this, but they both realize the flaw. The amount of sap required to magically strip the leaves far outweighs the potential harvest, making the method inefficient. Despite the setback, a new idea takes hold. She realizes that her unique skills allow for a more surgical approach, and she prepares to put a new plan into motion. Turning to her allies, she requests a specific tool from Kushina, a specialized tube, and asks Ricardo if he can bore a precise hole into the tree's trunk to accommodate it. With a sharp, controlled strike, a small opening is carved into the bark, perfectly sized for the implement. As the tube is fitted into place, Agato watches in fascination, realizing that this method allows the sap to be drawn out cleanly without the need for destructive harvesting. She explains the secret behind the tool, revealing that her creation skill allows her to manifest any complex component as long as she understands its design, resulting in a flexible, high-durability metal pipe. This expertise stems from her past, having spent countless hours observing the inner workings of her father's manufacturing plants, gaining the technical knowledge required for such precise alchemy. She proudly declares the tube to be of professional grade, a claim Kushina backs up by noting the incredible resilience of the material they are using. The sheer modern efficiency of the solution leaves the others stunned, though she remains focused on the task at hand, undeterred by their bewilderment. She stands before the massive trunk, her small frame dwarfed by the ancient bark. Kagami watches her closely, his voice low as he calls her name, sensing the gravity of the moment. He understands that the ancient lore of the forest is clear. The undying tree is a vengeful entity that will not tolerate any injury to its core, no matter how minuscule the puncture might be. He is not the only one weighing the consequences of their actions. As the young noblewoman reflects on the inherent risks of progress, she acknowledges that failure is an expected companion when venturing into the unknown, yet her spirit remains unbroken. With a fierce determination burning in her eyes, she clenches her fist and swears upon the honor of the Kakyoin name that she will find a way to overcome this obstacle and resolve the crisis at hand. A pair of hands carefully pulls open a heavy sack, revealing a collection of specialized, coiled metallic cables prepared for the task ahead. She stands amidst a clearing littered with construction supplies, from wooden planks to more of those sturdy metal coils, her expression set with a firm resolve to begin her project. She pumps her fist and shouts a declaration of her intent to succeed, while her companions watch from a short distance, their faces reflecting a mix of skepticism and mild amusement at her sudden burst of energy. They immediately set to work, attempting to lash the heavy cables around the base of a massive, ancient tree, the air filling with the rhythmic clanking of metal against wood. The young man strains against the weight and tension of the line, his face contorted with effort as he tries to secure the rigging while she watches closely. Suddenly, the tension proves too great, and the cable recoils with a violent snap, forcing them both to scramble back to avoid the whipping metal. The healer observes the failure from a safe distance, noting to her companion that the task is clearly not going as smoothly as they had hoped. Her companion remains deep in thought, his gaze fixed on the discarded cables as he analyzes the mechanical failure, prompting her to call out to him. He eventually breaks his silence to ask if their new allies might have originated from the eastern lands, but she admits that such personal details haven't been shared yet. The young woman, overwhelmed by the repeated setbacks and the stubbornness of the materials, throws her head back and lets out a primal scream of pure frustration. She continues to vent her frustration, demanding to know why the tree won't budge despite their efforts. Muto calmly observes the situation, noting that if the sap is truly like human blood, a tree that moves with the agility of an animal would not let its life force be taken so easily. He then offers a chilling, wide-eyed smile, suggesting that if it were him, he wouldn't mind having his blood drained. This dark sentiment and his unsettling expression leave his companions, especially the young woman and the blonde warrior, visibly disturbed by his morbid perspective. The young man falls into a silent trance, his gaze distant as he mutters the word bloodletting under his breath. Sensing his strange mood, his white-haired companion leans in with concern, asking if he has suddenly come up with a new idea or realization. This thought triggers a fleeting memory of a stern man in glasses who once lectured him, calling him a fool and questioning if he only learned through physical discipline. The memory is sharp and cold, a remnant of a past life that still lingers in the back of his mind. He quickly shakes off the intrusive thought, his expression returning to its usual guarded and neutral state. When pressed further by his companion's questioning gaze, he simply dismisses the moment, claiming that it was nothing of importance. As the sun begins to set and the sky darkens, the group decides to end their labor for the day, acknowledging that the constant sap collection has left them all exhausted. They agree to disperse for the evening and meet again the following morning to continue their task. Upon returning to the familiar warmth of the tavern, they are greeted by a chaotic scene. The sharp-tongued girl with the bobbed hair, now wearing a server's apron, nearly drops her tray in utter shock at their sudden arrival, her eyes bulging in disbelief. She quickly recovers her composure, her face contorting into a scowl as she demands to know why the brat has returned to her place of work. Her annoyance is palpable, her previous smugness replaced by genuine irritation at their presence. It becomes clear that she has been forced into service as a penalty for her earlier false report, a turn of events that brings a small sense of justice to the others. She grumbles and fumes while performing her chores, much to the silent amusement of the onlookers who watch her struggle with her new duties. Even while serving their meal, she cannot help but lash out, pointing a finger and shouting about the death penalty for any unsolicited advice. Her temper remains as fiery as ever, despite her new, humble role as a tavern worker. She continues her tirade, declaring that the boy deserves the death penalty for his insolence. Instead of wasting another moment on him, she insists they must focus their energy on finding a more efficient way to collect the sap. Nearby, Luna remains deep in thought, her brow furrowed as she considers their predicament. She realizes that the deadline Agato set is tomorrow morning, and she desperately needs to come up with a viable plan before the sun rises. As the pressure of the deadline mounts, a painful memory surfaces for Muto. He recalls being a young boy, hunched over his schoolwork while a harsh voice berated him for being foolish and failing to solve even the most basic problems. The memory shifts to a cramped room where his mother, preparing for a long night shift, tells him that his father will be looking after him. His heart sinks. He knows his father's temper is far more volatile than his mother's, and he dreads the hours of scrutiny ahead. His fears are realized as his father looms over him, shouting and demanding to know what kind of flawed logic he used to arrive at such an incorrect answer. Trembling and with tears blurring his vision, the young boy points a shaky finger at the paper, trying to explain his thought process through his quiet sobs. Returning to the present, he sits alone on a bench, the weight of those old insults still heavy on his shoulders. He mutters to himself that any idea he has is bound to fail because he is just a fool. Luna, having followed him, asks with genuine curiosity why he doesn't just give up when he's faced with so much failure. She meets his gaze with a fierce, unwavering intensity. She argues that if they quit now, Every struggle and every mistake they've made up to this point will lose all meaning and become nothing more than wasted effort. Her words strike a chord, leaving him momentarily stunned. He repeats the phrase to himself, trying to grasp the concept of failure having a purpose or a deeper meaning. She continues her explanation, gesturing to emphasize her point. She tells him that one can't truly know if something is a failure without trying it first, and even a failed attempt is a step forward because it proves that a specific method doesn't work, which is progress in itself. She leans in, her eyes bright with conviction as she tells him that one must never fear failure if they hope to achieve success. Kushina interjects, recalling their return from the forest and questioning if he had already conceived a plan then. He hesitates, his gaze drifting as he admits that such creative thinking was never permitted in his childhood home. She looks him directly in the eye, admitting with blunt honesty that she has reached the limit of her own capabilities and desperately needs to borrow his strength. He looks away, unsure of himself, and mutters that he isn't certain he can even articulate his thoughts properly. He begins to describe a strategy involving a massive, gnarled tree-like entity, suggesting they harvest its sap while its movements are sluggish. He elaborates, claiming he could halt the slowed roots by himself, after which they could use Ricardo's healing magic to seal the gashes. He sits alone on the wooden bleachers, his posture slumped as he continues to work through the logistics of a dangerous task. He suddenly stands, his voice rising with a mix of desperation and newfound resolve as he declares that Luna is nothing like his father and that he must place his trust in her. She stares back at him with a flat, unimpressed expression, cutting through his emotional outburst with a sharp refusal, stating that his plan is simply unacceptable. He is taken aback, trying to justify his recklessness by reminding her of his supernatural regenerative abilities, arguing that even being torn asunder wouldn't matter because he has grown indifferent to the pain. He is met with a flat refusal. Luna's gaze is firm as she shuts down his proposal, leaving him momentarily speechless and reeling from the rejection. She continues her critique, pointing out that his method of harvesting sap by shedding leaves is far too inefficient and costly. Furthermore, she argues that relying so heavily on Kushina's unique attributes makes the plan too dependent on a single person's traits, which is a strategic failure. Hearing this, he hangs his head in shame, apologizing for his reckless lack of foresight and admitting he hadn't considered the consequences. Luna's expression softens into one of deep distress as she begs him to wait, her voice trembling with the weight of her own internal struggle and the pain of seeing him so willing to discard himself. She then falls into a silent, intense contemplation, her eyes closed as she shuts out the world to focus. He watches her nervously, tentatively calling her name to check on her, but she merely murmurs that she is in the middle of searching for a viable solution. A sudden, violent memory flashes through her mind, the sight of him being brutally struck down, blood spraying as he endured agony for the sake of their goal. The visceral image of his self-destruction haunts her, fueling her desperation to find another way. Back in the present, he remains visibly shaken, sweat beading on his brow as he struggles to find the right words to justify his perspective. He admits that he doesn't know how to explain it well, but his concern for their progress is evident. Suddenly, her eyes widen with a spark of revelation. She exclaims that she has finally found the missing piece of the puzzle, the one thing she couldn't see before, leaving him staring at her in utter confusion as the tide of the conversation shifts. Standing before the massive, gnarled roots of the ancient tree, Muto and Luna prepare for the coming trial. He acknowledges her plan, stating that if her strategy is what's required for them to succeed, he will offer his full cooperation. They weigh the risks of the strategy, with Agato reminding them that this is their final opportunity and they cannot afford another failure. While Muto admits his own uncertainty about the outcome, Luna cuts through the hesitation with a sharp command, declaring the official start of the operation. Suddenly, a massive, pale appendage erupts from the earth with a sickening groan, signaling the arrival of their foe. Its movements are far swifter than during their previous encounter, catching them off guard. Muto shouts for Kushina to maintain the formation and follow the plan, and she acknowledges the command with a determined shout. He narrowly avoids a crushing blow as the limb slams into the ground, sending a spray of dirt and debris into the air. Despite the overwhelming force of the attack, he remains focused, searching for an opening. His ally, Agato, moves to shield him from the chaos, urging him to ignore what's behind him and focus solely on his specific objective. Muto gives a sharp nod, trusting his comrade to hold the line while he moves into position. He watches as another jagged protrusion tears through the earth, missing him by mere inches. Every second requires absolute precision as he tracks the entity's erratic and violent patterns. The relentless assault continues as the giant limb sweeps across the battlefield in a wide arc. He stays light on his feet, timing his movements to stay just ahead of the crushing weight. He steadies his breathing and clenches his fist, centering his resolve. With the target finally in his sights, he prepares to launch his counterattack. He lunges forward, scaling the massive limb with surprising agility. With a focused strike, he begins to shave away the creature's outer layer, the impact echoing through the clearing as he executes his part of the plan. He narrows his eyes, his gaze fixed intensely on the looming threat ahead as he prepares for the next phase of their desperate gambit. Suddenly, a massive, bark-covered limb crashes down with earth-shattering force, prompting him to scream out a warning to his companion to get clear. In response, she steps forward with her hand outstretched, declaring that it is finally her turn to act as she invokes a powerful creation skill to manifest a strange, organic device. The air crackles as the tube erupts and begins to bore into the creature's side, leaving the young warrior behind her wide-eyed at the display of such a unique and unexpected ability. She grips her staff tightly, her expression a mask of grim focus as she confirms her readiness to channel healing magic into the very thing they are fighting. As the tube sinks deeper into the rough bark, she closes her eyes, pouring every ounce of her concentration into the delicate process of integrating the device with the beast's anatomy. The creature's surface groans and splinters under the pressure, but she remains steadfast, explaining her plan to seal the wound while the tube remains embedded within its core. She reasons that if her theory holds, sealing the external damage will force the tree to cease its assault, and she calls out a word of encouragement to her ally to keep up the pressure. The massive entity recoils, its wooden frame shuddering violently as the foreign object takes hold and begins to disrupt its internal flow. Finally, the colossal tree-like beast stands momentarily paralyzed, the glowing vine wrapped tightly around its trunk like a restrictive collar that halts its movements. Agato praises Luna's healing magic, calling it impressive and noting how perfectly she executed the plan. Luna, however, looks down at her hands, feeling she might have overdone it, her expression a mix of relief and lingering exhaustion from the intense effort. The group stands in the shadow of the now silent behemoth. The massive tree creature remains motionless, its aggressive posture replaced by a forced stillness as the magic takes hold and the organic tube stabilizes within its frame. The internal mechanism of the trap is clear. By introducing an artificial tube into the creature's natural circulatory system, the magic has integrated it as a permanent fixture, much like a medical catheter, tricking the beast's body into accepting the foreign object as part of itself. He observes the creature closely, realizing that the key to its vitality was the sap itself. He waits with bated breath, watching for the final stage of the process to manifest as the creature's internal pressure shifts. Suddenly, the pressure reaches its limit. A torrent of fluid erupts from the creature, spraying across the clearing in a violent, messy discharge that signals the beast's total defeat. As the chaos subsides, Kushina sits on the ground, her head bowed in shame. She laments her own perceived weakness, frustrated that she couldn't even manage her own pain until the magic intervened. Muto listens, his expression softening as he realizes the depth of her self-reproach and the toll the battle took on her pride. She watches them, her own heart heavy with the weight of the battle. Agato approaches her, offering words of encouragement and reminding her that their victory was only possible because she refused to give up when things looked dire. The tension finally breaks, and the group erupts into cheers of triumph. Amidst the celebration, however, he remains focused, turning to the others with a serious question that cuts through the joy of their hard-won success. His sudden change in tone catches Luna off guard. Internally, he berates himself for his carelessness, realizing that he has once again used his unique abilities in plain sight, potentially inviting unwanted attention from those who might seek to exploit him. He reaches into his belongings and pulls out a sleek, black device, a smartphone, presenting it to the group as the source of his next revelation, a piece of technology that feels entirely out of place in this world. He holds the sleek, rectangular device steady as his companion stares in utter disbelief. Her eyes widen and her jaw drops as she asks if he truly knows what this object is, the presence of such technology in their world clearly shaking her to her core.